Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Thursday, almost to the weekend. Brian, we have a very interesting show topic coming everybody's way. This news broke yesterday, but we wanted to wait until today's show to really break down the Protect College Sports Act, which is a bill that's currently going through the workings right now with Maria Cantwell and Ted Cruz kind of being the engineers of this moving forward. And really, it's geared towards saving college sports and trying to correct a lot of the issues that a lot of us have with the current state of college football right now. And then after we wrap up that's going to cover the first two parts of today's show. After that, the SEC continues to have a very, very strange offseason, just full of a lot of complaining and a lot of whining out of that conference. And so we're going to talk some more about what was said and give our thoughts on it. And then we're going to wrap everything up today with a daily mailbag. Ideally, those questions will be focused on the topics that we covered today. So if you have questions about the Protect College Sports Act, if you have questions or really just any comments about what's been happening so far down in the SEC, feel free to throw in those mailbag questions. But Brian, this is going to be an absolutely loaded show today, man.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. This is going to be a different type of show, and we will have a mailbag today, but I'm going to make a request at the beginning. So number one, we'd like the mailbag to kind of be about these topics today. We're going to have a full mailbag tomorrow. It's Friday free for all. We can ask all your recruiting questions or anything else you have. I would also really like for the chat to really stay on topic today, because this is an interesting situation, Trev, because this just got dropped yesterday. And both Trevor and I have literally read through all of it. Like, Trev read it in a different, he found a way to do it, smart millennials, young people find cool ways. I literally just downloaded it and read through the whole bill last night. I'm like taking notes the whole time. Went to bed like 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm reading through the whole thing. Some of it I think we have a pretty good grasp on. Some of it I don't know that we are quite understand what they're looking at here because of the legalese, so to speak, that they talk about. So we're going to talk through this with you guys. And we're going to share our opinions of, some of it's just going to read what it says, and some of it, and we're going to kind of give our opinion of it, what we like, what we don't like. And then kind of talk about where do we go from here? Because what this is not is a passed law. This is simply nothing more than a proposal that they will then have to, have some conversations and negotiations with, and eventually hopefully get voted on. And voted on, then it comes down to, will it get passed, all those other kind of things. So we'll dive into all that stuff. But, we definitely want to do a mailbag at the end of the day, but it's going to work better, and it's going to be better for us and easier for us to kind of navigate through all this if the chat is also kind of navigating through it with us. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually send a link to the bill and kind of get your guys, so for those who want to kind of have it and read through it, we'll provide those things for you, because I do think it's important to read through those things. And if there's a situation where, maybe Trevor and I don't quite have it right, I want to know the answer to that. I want to say, okay, if there's a lawyer or if there's someone who works in politics that has a better understanding of, what this means, then we would love to hear it. Because what we're not doing today is we are not pretending that Trev and I have all the answers on this, and that we know everything, and this is exactly what it means. And we're working through this like you guys are. Now we've read through it, and we're going to try to give our best assessment and our analysis. But like, this is a discussion. This is truly a discussion, more so than like, hey, we have our opinions and these are the top 5 teams, and we're going to argue with Chief Brody, my dude, Chief Brody, about why he's wrong about 2018. Sorry, Chief, I just had to do it to you. Where it's like, okay, we have strong opinions on those things. This is not something that I necessarily feel like, oh, I got it all figured out. I have all figured out. Yeah, no doubt. That's why I want to talk through it with you guys and get your opinions of it as well. And that's partly what the mailbag is for, is you can, hey, look, here's what I think. You guys can do it. It just doesn't have to be questions, but it can also be questions as well. So I'm ready to dive into it, Trev. Part 1, we're going to focus on, sort of the fixed college sports aspect of it, which I think is more geared towards things like, sports agents, reining those in, the Lane Kiffin rule, transfer protections, eligibility, tampering, NIL, all that. And then there's a second part of the bill that's about media rights. It's an amendment to the you guys should know this, the sports, what is it? The Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961, which if you're a regular listener of Irish Breakdown, you've heard about this before because I explained to you what that bill was and what it did to college sports back when it was passed in 1961, and then how it was amended essentially with the Supreme Court case of Georgia versus, I forget who Georgia sued is, but basically Georgia and Oklahoma sued the NCAA. I think it was like the entity that was at the time navigating all the sports, because at the time schools were all kind of pulled together, and the Supreme Court ruled that they can, conferences and schools individually have the right to kind of do their own deals. So that was addressed here with this, and that part was actually a little harder to understand for us. It was a little less clear. So we're going to address all that. That'll be part 2 of the show. Then part 3 is when we'll get into it's just been a terrible offseason of PR for the SEC. Self-induced bad PR, in my opinion, that we'll dive into before the mailbag, Trev. So let's kick things off, Trevor, and dive into this aspect of it and talk about, we'll kind of go in order of how the bill is listed. And the first thing that I thought was there, which I was a big fan of, Trevor, is they had something that they called basically the Sports Agent Responsibility and Trust Act. And essentially what this does is this attempts to rein in what I believe is if you're ranking all the bad things that are going on right now, I think the just unregulated agent aspect of it, to me, is the worst aspect of all of it. Because what you're having is you're having a lot of young people being taken advantage of by predators. And Gerald Morgan Jr., former Notre Dame player, who's also in media, was kind of asking. I kind of took it as pushback at first towards the one-time transfer rule, but then I realized he was literally just asking, like, why is this rule, and one of the things I talk about the one-time transfer portal. And I said, well, one of the big things is you eliminate with the one-time transfer thing, you actually address this too. And the reason is because their agents are driving a lot of these decisions that turn out to be bad decisions for young people, because it's nothing more than it benefits them. For example, I know there's some Notre Dame prospects that are being driven or pushed aggressively by the agents to one school because that school is offering way more money than anybody else. And it's not in any way, shape, form, or fashion what's best for my client long-term. It's like, what's going to get the most amount of money because I want to get mine. And I don't think that's what a good agent does. And so this doesn't necessarily address that, but it does look to kind of take a big cut, Trev. And the biggest one is it puts regulations on how much of a cut of a player's endorsement deals they can get. And it caps it at 5%, which is right in line. I've talked to Ryan Roberts about this because he knows a lot of agents in the NFL for what he does with NFL draft coverage. He's like, yeah, it's like 3 to 5% is all NFL agents charge. You're getting people that are like, we're hearing stories about 20 and 30% from college sports agents, which is just insane. So if this passes, that would cap that at 5% of the value of the endorsement contract, which I think would be like, I wish they would just pull that out of this whole thing that's going to take just make it its own thing and pass it right now. Because unfortunately, this whole bill is going to take forever, especially as I've told you guys before, don't expect anything concrete in any shape, form, or fashion in Congress right now as they get ready for midterm. There's a particular bill that people are trying to get pushed through the Senate. House has passed it, pushed through the Senate, that literally has an 80+% favorability rating from the people. Republicans support it, Democrats support it, independents support it, and they won't even bring it up for a vote. They're just useless. Nothing is going to happen right now. And especially since three Republican, primary or two prominent Republicans were basically primaried out, which is I applaud all that. I wish we would primary all, like 95% of the people in Congress right now. But the reality is just nothing's going to get done right now. So if you're thinking this is going to get done before, it's just not going to happen. That's why I think this is something we could probably get a lot of people on board for. Just take that part out and just say, we're going to pass this as its own thing would be tremendous. But the big thing was, and there's other parts of it, but that 5% cap is huge for young athletes. Because here's the thing, Trev, if they're starting to get paid less, they're still going to make more money in certain instances because they're not getting 20, 30% of their deals taken. Not all agents are charging 20, 30%, right? Like not all agents are predatory. There are legitimately good agents out there that are looking out for the best of their players, just like anything else. Not all lawyers are bad. Not all lawyers are good. Not all judges are bad. Not all judges are good. Not all podcasters are bad. Not all podcasters are good. Not all, people that own, companies covering Notre Dame football are good, and not all are bad. Like I'm just literally trying to point to myself and all the things that we do as well, because there's no profession where everybody's good. Every pastor's not a good person and every pastor's not a bad person. Same with anything else. But there's it tends to people that are all about making money, that this is just a perfect field of young, impressionable, often naive people. And I don't say that like we're somehow better than that. I've said this before, Trev, and I believe you've agreed with me. If my family was going through this right now, we'd be in the naive category. We wouldn't know how to manage all this stuff. I'm the son of two parents who dropped out of high school. Now, they went on to be very successful in life, but they didn't know anything about the college process when I was going, to college. We would have had some struggles as well. And so they need something to kind of rein this stuff in, man. They took some major steps, not just the 5%, from some major steps with this first part of the act.
Yeah, I echo that same sentiment, man. I come from a family where the whole goal was like, get into college. Couldn't tell me or point me in what direction once I got there, but it was just get there, get to college, and you're going to be set. And I mean, one of the things here with this, Brian, and with reeling in some of the agents and some of the predatory nature of what they do to take advantage of a lot of these young people, when we talk about the Wild West of NIL and the transfer portal, it's not just about players. It's about the coaches, about the agents involved.
School presidents might be at the top of the list of the biggest people at fault for all this stuff. Yeah.
But honestly, and one of the things that I love about this bill in its entirety is it's basically looking to put regulations on current things that don't have any regulation. They say that they do, like, there's transfer portal regulations in place. No, there's not. There's not NIL regulations put in place. And those are some of the things.
There's no teeth to any of them. There's regulations, but they're more of guidelines.
Yeah.
Since there's no teeth, like anything that doesn't have an enforcement arm is just a recommendation.
Yeah.
There's no teeth to it whatsoever.
Yeah, without a doubt. With these agents, it's been a major problem in college sports the last couple of seasons. That's why you see guys hop in and out of the portal and they're going to the highest bidder. That's why you see guys just to use as an example, that's why you see guys like Damon Wilson, who one year was at Georgia, the next year was at Missouri, the next year is at Miami, because he's going to the highest bidder. Now, in Damon Wilson's defense, he's been productive every single place that he's been, but because of his production, allows himself, his agent, his support group around him to be able to make these decisions, honestly, financially based. I mean, I could go on about this for hours, but the part of the bill, one of the major parts of the bill is being able to rein in some of how these agents are able to roam around and go and do the things that they wish to do to make their pockets a little bit deeper. And that's something I think it's going to be huge.
Some other aspects of this, Trev, they cannot enter into an agency contract that extends beyond their eligibility. That happened, I remember specifically with it's happened before, but there was a kid that signed with Florida out of high school a couple years ago, whose agent basically kind of coerced him into, I own your name, image, and likeness rights for the rest of your career, which you talk about predatory. That's exactly what we're talking about there. It also it says they cannot make any materially false, deceptive, or fraudulent representation as an athlete agent that misrepresents the existence, nature, or value of a name, image, and likeness opportunity the agent can arrange on behalf of the student athlete. So they can't, because you got this happening all day. Hey, look, man, I got this deal I can get for you if you just sign with me, blah, blah, blah. And then, it didn't pan out. It says that student athletes can bring civil action to an appropriate district court of the U.S. or an appropriate state court to seek damages against agents that they see do right by them. It also forces agents, and I don't know if this is already happening or not, but it forces agents they have to register with a state And there has to, you have to be a registered agent, essentially, not that kind of registered agent, but you have to be an agent who is registered and enter into an agency contract with the student athlete before providing representation and endorsement contract. And there's now a mechanism for agents to be decertified, which I think is huge. Agents that aren't living up to the standard and the rules can now be decertified. And under the structure, if you're decertified, no schools will work with you. And so I think that this is something that I like, that like there's a lot of things that Greg Sankey will just like randomly throw in, like, we're just here to protect student athletes. And then like the 5 minutes before that comment, the 5 minutes after that comment have nothing to do with actually like protecting student athletes. I did like the fact that this was the first thing that they addressed in this bill, because this is something that actually protects student athletes and their families from predators. Again, not all agents are that way, but they don't need to be protected from the people that are doing it the right way. They need to be protected from the people that aren't. And I know it can come across as like you're just throwing all agents under the bus. I mean, I get that. If you're someone who believes everything is speaks 100% to everybody, and if I shouldn't have to clarify all the time. Like, I'm not saying everyone, but there are predatory people in this profession, and it's not just agents. And we'll get into that in other sections. But I love that they started with this. I thought this was a really good first step.
Agreed completely. But this bill touched on a whole heck of a lot more. The next one being what a lot of people are coining is the Lane Kiffin rule, which I find hilarious. But basically, it puts restrictions on coaches' abilities, when they can leave and when schools can also hire head coaches. So basically what the Kiffin rule is it makes it illegal for a coach to leave their teams before the season concludes. And then off of that, schools can't hire a coach before the season concludes, thus being the Lane Kiffin rule, because we all remember what happened last year with Ole Miss. It makes you wonder if their opportunities on outlets like a FanDuel or ESPN would have gone up for them, their chances to maybe make a deeper run in the playoffs or make the national title game, odds-wise, not on the field-wise, if they still had their head coach. But it's been a big issue. Now, the one question that I have about this facet of the bill is I don't know if will this prevent, Brian, and please feel free to jump in here. Does this prevent schools from beginning the hiring process while the season is still in? Can you interview other coaches? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't stop you from hiring a coach in season. It doesn't stop you from firing a coach. It simply means I can hire you in November, but you can do absolutely nothing at this school that we're going to hire you to until your season is over with. If your team makes the playoffs, you can't do anything. So last year, there were two coaches who got SEC jobs whose teams made the playoff, Lane Kiffin and John Sumrall. Now, I'm going to make this sound very specific and blame the coach for everything to make a point. In the Lane Kiffin situation, in reality, both Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss acted inappropriately. And you could make a case that Ole Miss acted more inappropriately than Lane Kiffin did. You could make that argument. I'm going to put all the blame on Lane Kiffin to simply make a point. So please understand that. So let's just say John Sumrall, totally righteous in what he did. He balanced the two jobs, worked hard at Tulane, also was doing things to go help Florida get started at Florida. But he saw it through. Then there's Lane Kiffin, who just gave the middle finger to Ole Miss and said, I know I led you to the playoffs, but I'm taking the LSU job. I'm out. Again, not saying that happened. I'm making an example. In this certain scenario, Lane Kiffin can quit on Ole Miss if he wants to. Again, I'm pretending that's what he did, but he can do nothing at LSU. He can't talk to players. He can't talk to agents. He can't recruit. He can't start working on hiring a staff. He can't talk to He can't do anything that would be considered a job of the head football coach at LSU until Ole Miss's season is over with. So that is kind of what this does. So John Sumrall would also, however, be under the same mold. He, who tried to do it the right way, still couldn't do anything at Florida. He'd have to see it through. So no matter which angle you go, it prevents a coach from basically doing anything at the new place. Now, it doesn't prevent a coach from leaving the school he's at, nor does it prevent the school from saying, we don't want you to coach. Because what Ole Miss did with Lane Kiffin this year is not a whole lot different than something we saw, well, gosh, Trev, almost 40 years ago in basketball. I've said, I think we've talked about this before, but Bill Frieder, when he told Bo Schembechler he was going to leave for Arizona State to become the new head basketball coach at Arizona State, Bill Frieder had every intention of coaching Michigan in the NCAA tournament. And Bo Schembechler said, So now I think Bo was a little bit more honest with it than what Ole Miss was. Ole Miss basically wanted to tell Lane Kiffin to take a hike and then play the victim, right? So again, I don't like what Lane Kiffin did. I don't like what Ole Miss did. Sometimes there's not a good side to the conversation. And it was honestly easier for Tulane to be okay with it than Ole Miss. I get that. So I don't act like Tulane was holier than thou. It's not in your league. But the point is, Schembechler came out and said, a Michigan guy is going to coach Michigan. Coach at Arizona State is not going to coach Michigan in the basketball tournament. So this isn't new. And then, of course, Michigan went on and won the national championship that year with Glenn Rice and Lloyd Vault, Ramil Robinson, Terry Mills, Sean Higgins. It's a great team that they had back then. So this isn't new. But what this does, and this also applies to all sports. This isn't just football. We're going to talk about it because we're talking about it from a football standpoint. But this would also would have prevented Bill Frieder from doing anything related to Arizona State until Michigan got done with the national championship. So they call it the Lane Kiffin rule. That's not what this was. This was not like the committee didn't say it's the Lane Kiffin rule. That's just kind of what it's dubbed, right? Like the death penalty that SMU got was not called the death penalty. That's just what it was dubbed. So in this instance, Trev, they went through this long list of things that says you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. Okay, great. But as I'm reading it, I'm thinking, okay, it says, you shall not during the same competitive season perform for another institution any duties or responsibilities customarily associated with the head football coach of a varsity sports team, including at a minimum. And it went through recruiting and recruiting strategy, evaluations, roster management, facilitating, coordinating, negotiating, or otherwise materially influencing name, image, and likeness activities, directing, supervising, or materially influencing coaching staff or team operations, participating in practice planning, like none of it. And then it goes on to say, okay, well, what are there going to be any enforcement? Then at the end, you get to the enforcement arm of it. And it says violation means that individuals shall be ineligible to assume the duties as head coach of the varsity sports team for intercollegiate football sports at the hiring institution for the subsequent competitive season after the season in which the violation occurred, and be subject to additional penalties sufficient to ensure compliance. Essentially, that means you get suspended for a year. So if this rule was in place, and let's just say John Sumrall and Lane Kiffin did what they did, one guy doing it, trying to do it the right way, one guy not. Again, in this example where we pretend Lane Kiffin was 100% at fault, just to make a point, they both get suspended for the 2026 season. So it prevents any of that at all. What the question is, Trevor, is how does this impact people's hiring practices and firing practices moving forward?
Yeah, that's the one thing. It's a lot of the questions that I have about this bill are what's the aftermath, assuming that it gets passed? How do teams go about their hiring process? Would a team like Penn State not have fired James Franklin because of the hiring process and how those things could have went out? I think all those are very valid questions. Would Lane Kiffin still be at Ole Miss if that happened? Very curious to see how that goes there. I'm with you. But I do think that this is a step in the right direction as far as that goes. I mean, we had, during the time that all of the Lane Kiffin stuff broke, we talked a lot about how this isn't how it is in the NFL, and you can't have, you could fire a coach whenever you want to, but then you can't go out and just hire a head coach the next couple weeks. And at the time, it's what felt like Ole Miss and LSU went through. So I'm with you, man. I think this is a big step in the right direction, as is limiting the transfer portal, the amount of transfer portal entries that a player can have, and a lot of the protections that go in there. That's another big piece of this bill. when you have kids that are going on their sixth or seventh school, I mean, one small step in the right direction was getting rid of one of the portal windows, which I think helps. So then coaches can manage a roster at the start of winter workouts all the way through the end of the season. But there needs to be some sort of limit to prevent kids from just being a portal merchant, and they're at one school in 24, a different school in 25, another school in 26, and inevitably at another school in 2027. So basically what it says is you get one free transfer without penalty. And then there is an exception if your coach gets fired, or if your program no longer has that sport. So can't coin this as my own knowledge, but my buddy was talking to me about Grand Canyon University and how like their men's volleyball team just won like the national championship, and now it no longer has volleyball.
There's a football example of this. Terrell Davis began his career in college at Long Beach State. George Allen was their head coach. The old Redskins coach was their head coach, and they dropped football. And he transferred to Georgia and was the backup to Garrison Hurst. So, like, we've seen that before. It doesn't happen often, and it's been a while. But yeah, volleyball. What was it that what was the sport Arkansas was going to drop, and then they decided to bring it back? I forget what it was, but Arkansas was going to drop a couple sports, and then they brought him back because the donor stepped up and things like that. But yeah, your sport gets dropped, you can transfer right away. I like the fact that they said also that if the head coach leaves, if I was in the meeting with them and they asked my opinion, and they don't care about my opinion, but I wish someone had a similar view. The one thing that I would say is I believe that this should come down to if a coach leaves on his own, that there should be a window before players can jump in the portal, even for a second time. I get back to it again. If the coach leaves, this just says you can leave, you can transfer. If you fire a coach, I'm not protecting the school at all. Hey, you chose to fire this coach. So Auburn fires Hugh Freeze. I mean, it was a smart decision. You should have fired Hugh Freeze. But your players can leave, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's different than, let's say Ole Miss, whose coach left. There should be a window until the new coach is named, where the new coach is named, and then you've got like a 2-week window where he has time to sit down and talk to all the players before the portal opens up. And that's a two-way street. Some of it is trying to convince some players to stay. The other one is like, you let those players know, hey man, you're not in our plans. And that player knows I can jump in the portal before it's too late. So that's the only thing that I would like to see as well, is sort of that the difference is when a coach leaves, there's two different scenarios. And I feel like in one instance, you're punishing the school for something they had no say in. And the other one, it's like, okay, yeah, the school does deserve to have some consequence. It's not even punishment. What I get so sick of with so many different things, it's like the Brendan Sorsby thing. We're trying to get into the society of this no consequences society. And the reality is look, when you make certain choices, there are going to be consequences. What you as an adult have to decide is whether or not I'm willing to accept those consequences for my actions. And if not, then don't do the action. I mean, it's real simple. And I'm about to go down a path I don't want to go down right now. But the point is, I like the fact that they had in there exceptions for, and then there's also a couple others, sexual assault or harassment of the student athlete by someone associated with the sports team. That is obviously a good thing on its face. The concern I have, however, is that do you open up an avenue where some player wants to leave and their agent convince them to accuse the school of this, which then will get the school to release it or threaten that. I hope that we don't get to that, but sadly, when lawyers and stuff get involved, that can be a concern. And then the final piece is I was very happy about. If you graduate, you can transfer a second time. I was concerned that they were going to get rid of that because I hadn't heard anything about that. And that was good. You should always reward a young person for graduating. Of course, I'd also like for them to get an education during that time. It's not just about getting the piece of paper, but I did like that. So the old graduation rule, so if you transfer after your freshman year, and then graduate, you can transfer again for your 5th year or 4th and 5th years if you graduate early.
I did have a question if we could backtrack, not pushing back, just one needing some clarity. So when you were talking about the different circumstances that coaches leave and like players being able to enter the portal, were you saying that you don't think players, if the school elects to fire the coach, not if the coach leaves, if the school elects to fire a coach, the players shouldn't be granted another?
No, should immediately.
Okay.
No win. So I believe all players should eventually have access to transfer if the coach is gone, no matter the circumstances. All that I wish they would do is if the coach chooses to leave on his own, school didn't choose to do that, that there should be a window before the players can go into the portal that gives them time to hire a new coach and gives the new coach time to sit down and meet with the players and try to give their spiel for staying. That's it. There should be no pathway to say you can block a kid from going into the portal. I don't believe that should be there. I'm simply saying, like, it's kind of like a coach leaving on his own is different than a coach being fired, because the school as a whole, in one instance, is being punished by the choice of one person who chose to leave. In the other instance, the school as a whole is making a decision, and they've got to live with that decision and all the consequences that come with it. That's what I mean. But in both avenues, Trev, the players should have the opportunity to jump in the portal. I just would like to see it delayed for 2 weeks until after the coach is hired before that happens. That's sense. What is so good clarifying question.
Sticking along the lines of player eligibility here, Brian, the other thing that the Protect College Sports Act covers is player eligibility. Mm-hmm. And talking about how this is kind of that introduction to that 5 for 5. If I was reading that correctly, it's players will have 5 years of eligibility to compete at that level. Mm-hmm. And another thing that it did go on to say, now, some of this, there are still some questions that we have about it, but it also prohibits pro athletes from competing at the college level if they've received compensation in their professional careers. Yeah. That includes earning potential overseas. There's some where it's like, sometimes people, though, will go like straight from high school to a league over in Europe. Those are some questions that I still have about it. But again, this isn't an act that is just football specific. It's for all of college sports. And so that's a nice add in on what that eligibility rule is.
Like the pro sports thing has not hit college football yet. That's been more of a basketball. I would sure like in tennis maybe, and in maybe hockey, I'm sure there's like some, professional-ish. That's going to need some working out because there's different levels of being a quote-unquote pro athlete in Europe compared to what we're seeing now. Like these guys that are, 20-something-year-olds coming over from European basketball leagues going to college basketball. Like, no. Some 18-year-old who, they don't really have a high school team, so he's part of this pro league, but he's in like level 2 or 3 or something. Like that's a different situation. Like Mo Wagner from Michigan a few years ago was kind of in that weird, like he was kind of a pro athlete, but not really a pro athlete kind of thing. It's different than, the league Arvydas Sabonis was playing in, or Drazen Petrovic was playing in before they came over to the United States. So, but there's some caveats on this. So it was like the 5 for 5. It's either the student athlete's 19th birthday, whichever comes first, the student athlete's 19th birthday, his high school graduation date, expected high school graduation date based on the first year of high school enrollment, or the date a student athlete enrolls full-time in an institution. They also provided some exceptions. Pregnancy is one. So if a student athlete, obviously if a women's basketball player, tennis player, lacrosse player has a child and that causes her to miss that season, then obviously that would allow her to get an additional year. Same thing with religious mission. So this was something I was curious about too, Trev, is like, how's this going to affect BYU and Utah? Now, a lot of schools have kids go on missions. Notre Dame's had kids go on missions. Kahanu Kia, Chris Badger. You remember Chris Badger?
Yeah.
So they've had some Mormon student athletes in Notre Dame that have done missions. But BYU and Utah especially have a lot of those kids, and especially BYU. But they do make an exception for religious missions. So if, the kids from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I think is actually what the Mormon church is called. they can still do their missions and maintain 5 years. So if they do it after high school. So I thought that was good. Active duty military service. So if we ever get into a situation where members of the Naval Academy or West Point or the Marine Corps get called into duty, they don't lose their eligibility. Now, that hasn't happened in a while, but that did happen in our grandparents' era, where Notre Dame had guys. I mean, Notre Dame didn't have football for a couple of years, but Notre Dame had guys that went and served and came back and were able to finish their careers. So, and then an absence adopted by rule or by law by an intercollegiate athlete association that apply uniformly to all student athletes. I'm not quite sure what that was. It just kind of gives them some sort of, protection. But obviously pregnancy, religious mission, and active duty military service are the exceptions to that. So no medical, no injury exceptions, no 7th year because you missed, there's no more Max Johnsons. Trev and I were talking about this yesterday off air. We were going through all the different quarterbacks in the country, and we're like, wait a minute, Max Johnson still in college football? This dude was throwing passes in 2020. Like, what are we doing here? Miami linebacker, was it Mo Traore, right? Or Toure?
Oh, Mohamed Toure.
Toure is like going into his 8th year. They had a guy at tight end a couple years ago who was going to his 9th year. That's all gone with this, unless it's for something like we said, a religious mission, and then with women's sports, if there's a girl who has a baby or something like that, which I was happy to see them put that there. I don't know that I've heard that often.
Mm-mm.
You don't really hear that. You hear that more in the WNBA, or not as much as whatever. We can get into that, but you hear that in other female sports, where you'll see take some time off to have a kid, things like that. But so yeah, the eligibility thing got addressed, and they finally put something to it. What I'd be curious about is if there's another governing body that's attempting to pass this outside of this. And I'd be curious if they have the same, like, do they adopt the same language or not? It'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, without a doubt. One of the questions that I did have, and I'll ping pong this back over to you, Brian, was what they talked about as far as tampering goes with things like the transfer portal.
One thing I did want to say real quick before we go on to that, Trev, I forgot to put this in the outline, but there were some eligibility restrictions that they granted the NCAA, which were illegal performance-enhancing drugs, participation in sports wagering, and then violating the institution's code of conduct that applies to all students. Because as you're reading this, you're like, they cannot restrict eligibility. They cannot. And I'm like, dude, this is going to, can they have rules? And then at the end, they did have that. So I was like, whew. It's like, you can't have rules of whether a kid can or can't be on the team. You can just do whatever the heck you want. So I was good to see that in there. So anyway, the tampering stuff, Trev, we can move on to that.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I had questions about, or maybe I was just misunderstanding. I didn't know if there was any clear-cut outline for tampering with things like the transfer portal. That might have been something that I had glossed over, but what did you see in there as far as the penalty or the teeth that it's giving the NCAA?
There was a lot there as far as what they can and can't do. I didn't see perhaps I missed it. I'd be curious if you guys pointed out. I read through it multiple times, and I didn't see the mechanism of enforcement. I didn't see what it was. I was reading this at like 1 2 o'clock in the morning last night, but I remember making a note. Actually, let me pull up my note right now. I had a note that says strong rules against, don't see any punishment structure. That was the note that I had in there that I thought was interesting. So, but they had some very strong rules about tampering and things you can't do. And it went through this long list of people that, anyone, it's like, just so you don't have any sort of, I think at one point in time, it was like anyone remotely associated or knowing, because you're going to always have these people that are going to try to find, well, we didn't do it. We had, the cousin of so-and-so, janitor who works at such and such. And anyone representing a school in any way, shape, form, or fashion was addressed, which I thought was needed, because how schools are, man. They're gonna look for any loophole they can, and then when it benefits them, and then when it doesn't benefit them, then obviously they're gonna cry about this needs to get fixed, and we got to do this and we got to do that, and all these other kind of things. But Here's one. This is my favorite one. Let me see where it was here. See, is it? Yeah, I think it's prohibited institution, employee of an institution, a volunteer of an institution, an associated entity, an athlete agent, a conference, an employee of a conference, or a volunteer of a conference from inducing student athlete to enroll at an institution or transfer to an institution by offering compensation to a student athlete in violation of paragraphs 1, 2, and 3. So, yeah, I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I wonder if some of it is one of the reasons why they didn't lay out repercussions of tampering is they're assuming that if this bill gets passed in its entirety the way that it is right now, it will just limit it so much with limiting when coaches can interact with players if they get a new job and the agent, the restrictions for future agents, things like that. Maybe they're just assuming tampering won't happen. I'm not sure.
Well, I also, the thing is, and this kind of directs something that was talked about before, this is an antitrust exemption bill, essentially. So what it does is it allows the NCAA to then create the mechanisms for that and then be protected from being sued. The issue that we have now is the NCAA is not they don't have the same antitrust exemptions that the National Football League has, that the NBA has, that Major League Baseball has, and entities like that. So people say, well, agents are going to sue and coaches are going to sue. Sue for what? Because once they get the antitrust exemptions, you can sue, but your ability to be even seen or heard is going to be largely dismissed in a lot of instances. Now, there may be some suits that are able to make their way up, but like it's still a tricky situation because you still have the employee versus non-employee. In professional sports, they have the antitrust exemptions, but they also have player unions, their employees, they have a collective bargaining and all this type of things. I mean, there's still some tricky aspects to this. I don't want to act like this is just, everyone's going to stop suing. People will still try to sue, but the NCAA is going to have a lot more authority now in protection. They have no protection right now. And so this will give them to where they can now create enforcement and create, hey, if you do this, this is what happens. And so I think some of this stuff is going to be now, okay, we're saying you can't do this. Now it's up to you guys to figure out what the punishments. That could also be it, Trev. That's just me guessing, just like you guessed. Like it could be that as well. I'm not quite sure why they didn't lay out a penalty structure, because they did lay out a penalty structure in the coach leaving in season aspect. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, we'll see what comes out of that. I'm with you. Definitely interesting. One of the biggest parts of the bill was talking about NIL adjustments. Now, yesterday when we first kind of read it, and a lot of the headlines that came out were like, this bill looks to cap NIL and cap NIL, and off of first gut reaction, I was like, well, I'm against that because these are two guys that you guys listen to all the time that talk about they're against capping NIL.
Mm-hmm.
But when you dive further into what the actual goal is, I'm actually in support of what this bill is trying to accomplish by how I am interpreting it. And after conversation with Brian, kind of how he's interpreting it as well. So, when they talk about capping NIL, I don't think cap is necessarily the right word, but it's designed to create a national standard for NIL compensation. And that's something that I can be on board for. In layman's terms, it's trying to kill the pay for play. The bill is trying to kill the workarounds and give the College Sports Commission, I think the CSC, the opportunity to reject NIL deals that don't meet like valid business purposes. So Brian and I always talk about how, like, if Gurley Leap Honda up north wants to sign a Notre Dame player to a deal and they come to X amount of meet and greets and drive one of their cars, that is the purity of NIL. That is what it was intended for. What this bill wants to do is limit the NIL collectives and the third-party donors that are like, hey, come to our school and I'll just give you $500,000.
Mm-hmm.
NIL. So that's what it wants to eliminate. After reading some of those things, my interpretation, I'm actually on board with this.
If we're reading it correctly, what I think they're looking to put a cap on, because they say in the bill cap, I think what they're looking to do is to go back to the cap involving what the schools can provide.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be the rev share and stuff like that. What this is trying to do is this is trying to get rid of the pay for play aspect. The reality is when you're handing out rev share money, that is pay for play essentially. But that's not pay for play that I have a problem with. I've said I think that if it was up to me, if I was, king of all of this and I was king of the United States of America, and just I'm glad we don't have one, but if I was king, if I was king of this bill and, hey, Brian, we're going to do whatever you want to do, one thing that I would have in there is, as I've said before, is I would say this is how much that each school gets per student athlete. So because I want to prevent a school from saying, okay, well, if we get to pay I think it was something like 36 baseball players, like something like that, 13, 15 basketball players per team or something like that, and 105 football players. Okay, well, here's what we're going to do. We get 20.5 million, but we're only going to have 90 football players in the roster. We're going to have 12 basketball players in the roster. We're going to go to 28 baseball players. And so we're going to cut those spots and then pocket that money to either A, we keep, or B, then we can give more to a smaller group of players. Say, no. This is how many athletes that we're allowing you to have. This is the max number. If you go below that, this is the max number of roster spots you can have. 105 football players, 15 sports, whatever the case may be. And then we'll divide whatever that number is, and each athletic spot gets $1 value. It's the same one for every football player. So 105 football players, plus 20. So you put all the sports together, and it comes to, let's just say, 209 student athletes max spots in these sports. Okay. Divide that by whatever that number is, and you get that spot. So if you only have 185 players, you only get that much for 185 players. That's what I would do. And then everybody gets the same amount. And then beyond that, what you make is going to be dependent upon what you can get in the NIL world. Because I'm reading through this, Trev, and it sounded like they were trying to say, cap. But then there's the exception that says, unless it's like a business related thing. And my note I have down here, let me see if I find it. Where is my NIL notes? Did I not keep my NIL notes? Looks like I fell asleep before I took those notes. And I can't type in name, image, and likeness because they talk about that a million times. Do you remember what section that was, Trev? I know it was.
I think it was section 101, if I remember off the top of my head. One of the notes that I do have in here kind of goes to the point you're talking about is the bill states that it won't put a cap on, quote, true opportunities based on name, image, and likeness.
Right. So that goes to what we discussed. So there's the pay for play aspect, which is the rev share. This is how I read it. And if somebody's reading it differently, please let us know because this is how we read it. But we weren't sure. We had to talk through it together. The rev share part, that's the cap. Whatever that number is, that's capped. And then that cap is supposed to rise, whatever, within cost for inflation, things like that. But then NIL is now something different that's not through the schools, that can't be promised through the schools, that has to now be through a business aspect. So as we've often mentioned, Gurley Leap wants to give Leonard Moore, CJ Carr $1 million. And it doesn't lay out specific guidelines, but it does say that it has to be for a business purpose. So that means that they're expecting some sort of give and take. That is kind of what NIL is supposed to be. So it looks like they're trying to define it more of what it's supposed to be. There's rev share, which is over here, and then there's NIL, which is over here. Right now, they're combining them both, and that's why schools have $30, $40 million payrolls, including Notre Dame. They're trying to separate and say this has got to get capped because that's protecting the schools because they don't have to now pay the 30, 40. NIL over here, you can facilitate this. If Under Armour wants to do a deal where they got 10 Notre Dame players or 20 Notre Dame players to do this, they can do that. And that's okay. If Nike wants to make sure that one of their schools gets the number 1 ranked basketball player in the country and they want to sign him to a deal, and part of the deal is you go to this school, okay, or one of these 4 schools that are all Nike schools, that's okay. As long as there's look, you got to market this kid. This kid's got to be part of, it's got to be an actual thing where, you're doing that, then I'm more open to that than what we're saying now, which is the kids are literally signing 2-year contracts for X number of dollars. That's it. And that's not how it's supposed to be, in my opinion. So it sounds like they're pushing back on this.
Agreed. And it's also giving the CSC the opportunity to reject NIL deals that don't meet valid business purposes. That was the other, there was no caveat to the current infrastructure in place. to Brian's point, there was nothing to counter kids signing 2-year multi-million-dollar deals. Nothing that goes through and sits down and reads like, okay, well, what is this deal? Is the deal simply you come play for school A and you get this amount of money, or is there an actual business transaction that's happening here? Come to X amount of meet and greets, X amount of autograph signings, you do a commercial or two, and you drive one of their cars. Or something like Jeremiah Love signed a deal with New Balance. So he was in like a photo shoot with New Balance. He wore New Balance shoes. I think he had a pair of New Balance cleats and things like that. And so that's the other thing that I like that this does, talking about the NIL space, is it gives the NCAA and the CSC ammunition to fight back on, hey, like this isn't an NIL deal per name, image, and likeness. This is pay for play. It's going to eliminate the Dave Portnoy's of the world that just wants to give Michigan $3 million to get Bryce Underwood.
Right, for nothing. Right. Somebody had a comment too, and I read this, Trev. DJ said, did you notice in the tampering part it says enrolled or committed? Does that mean when a kid commits and says they are shutting down recruitment, they can't be contacted? I have a feeling in the final bill that word is going to get amended to signed.
Yep.
I think when they mean committed, I think that's just a non-football, non-sports person who's not in the world like we are and like you guys are, who followed on the daily. I think what they mean by is like a player that has signed a letter of intent. I would be shocked if they mean once a kid gives a verbal commitment, you can't contact them because there's no binding agreement. Now, it could mean if a kid signs a contract, an NIL contract with a school, like a guarantee, something along those lines, part of the cap thing, then that might be it, but that's still signed, not committed. So I would imagine that there's some sort, because you can't, there's no way, I mean, I shouldn't say this. There are certainly laws where I've seen people win lawsuits because they gave their word and then backed out, and they say, look, in this state, there are certain states in the country where you giving a verbal agreement locks you into some sort of relief if you back out of that agreement. It's like a signed contract. And I've seen some states where that's, where I've read news where there's like a lawsuit about that, and they've explained it. In other states, it's like, you can't, like in Indiana, for example, Trev, I can have you sign a non-compete, but I can't really enforce it. I can just make it to where I'm going to just make it legally expensive for you to do it. But that's why there was no non-compete language in your contract other than just like, hey, look, here's the right way to go about doing this, because I can't enforce it in this state. In other states, I can sign you to a non-compete and hold you to that non-compete to where you can't go work for somebody for a year or two, right? Because I'm in Indiana. Now, if I was having you cover Notre Dame and you lived in Indiana, but your contract was signed and I'm in another state that allows non-competes, then you'd be binded. The language of the contract would be such that all rules are under the state of North Carolina's rules towards that. And then that would make it harder for you. So like there are different things from state to state that get into word, but that can't be what they mean. Because the whole point of this is to try to create something that is simplified and protects players. That would not protect players at all. You give a verbal commitment and now you're locked in, people can't talk to you. I don't think that's what they mean. Even though the word commit means there, I have a feeling that you're going to see that language changed in the final bill of the draft, because, I mean, teams could look and say, well, look, this kid committed to us during his visit. He can't back out now. That would be a terrible idea. Terrible idea.
Yeah.
I wish kids would give their word more, but at the same time, it's like things change. Like things change. Like I couldn't get upset of a Notre Dame player that was committed to play for, Mike Mickens, to say, hey, I don't want to, I committed to play for Mike Mickens, and now he can't get out of it because the position coach left. I mean, or he just changes his mind. Hey, I committed to you, but that was before I had offers from Notre Dame, Georgia, Ohio State, and Texas. Like,
or the scenarios where it's like, yeah, I committed to you when I was a sophomore in high school and I've gone on X number of visits. It's like, yeah, I'm with you completely. I'm with you. Yeah. Before we move on to the second part, Brian, where we start talking about pooling media rights and things like that, wanted to pose a question. We talked about a lot, the Lane Kiffin rule, eligibility rules, the tampering stuff, NIL, the sports agent registry, things like that. Do we think this gets passed? Because we can sit here and talk about what all the benefits are and what we like about the bill, but at the end of the day, till the rubber meets the road, it's kind of all speculation at this point. So what do you think? Do you think this gets passed?
I'm not optimistic. The problem is, Trev, and this is where I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this as well. I'm very curious to hear the thoughts of people in the chat. Well, I mean, it's easy to say it won't get passed. There's going to be some things that are altered and taken out and added in and things like that, because you're going to have the schools that have wield the most power are going to still get a lot of say in this. And there's a lot of things in here that the Big Ten and the SEC are not going to like.
Nope.
And different things for both of them, right? And so there will be some changes. And like, well, I mean, if it passes, there's nothing they can do about it. Yeah, but in the meantime, they can continue throwing. This is what I love. These schools and these conferences throw millions of dollars at lobbying, and then they want to cry poor that they can't pay players. Oh, we don't have any money. Well, maybe you shouldn't have. Hey, Florida State, you're crying about not having money to pay out Mike Norvell. Maybe you shouldn't have used all that money to sue the ACC and go through all those court cases. Maybe you'd have a little bit more money to pay your buyout. You know, like you can't cry foul when you're spending money to lobby. You know what I mean? So, you know, you lose me a little bit there with that argument, but they'll just lobby their local senators or their state representatives and just say, hey, look, this isn't good for us, and this is why. And so it really comes down to who is able to kind of get their state reps to go along with what they want in either direction. I'm hopeful that, like, look, Ted Cruz is pretty conservative and Maria Cantwell is pretty liberal in a lot of ways. And the fact that they, you know, there's some things in here that are very clearly Maria Cantwell emphases. The thing about we'll get into this in part 2, but the protecting women's sports, protecting Olympic sports, that is very clearly Maria Cantwell. And I'm not saying that because she's a Democrat or liberal. That's a liberal thing. She's vocalized and stated publicly that's something that's very important to her. So the fact that you have two people that are pretty opposite in their political viewpoints, this isn't like you know Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski is with, I don't know, find like a moderate John Fetterman. You know, two people that are all like kind of in the middle, and you know, this is like right wing conservative Ted Cruz, left wing liberal Maria Cantwell. We're a big part of putting this together. Gives me some hope that they'll each be able to kind of rally their side to this enough to where it can get passed. That's my hope, with some provisions, because then there'll be a House bill that they'll vote on, and then they'll go to reconciliation and things along those lines. But right now, this hasn't officially been presented to the floor because the Senate's not in session right now because they don't feel they need to do their job. So they just keep leaving, which is wonderful, right? That they do that. I say somewhat seriously and somewhat sarcastically. Like, I wish they didn't spend as much time in session, but I wish they would actually do stuff during the times they are in session. But it is what it is. So I am more optimistic than maybe some in the media that this will get done in some form or fashion, but it won't look exactly like it did here. The question is going to be what eventually gets passed. I'm confident that this bill will pass in some form. The question is how much is going to get added in? How much is going to get taken out? Will it become one bill that focuses on the NIL, the likeness, the tampering, and then another bill that does the media stuff? Will it stay one bill? Those are all things that obviously it's going to take a while to figure out. It won't get figured out before the midterms, I would imagine. And that's an unfortunate thing, but I think that's kind of where we are right now in our political landscape. There just doesn't seem to be a lot of desire for anyone to do anything except just kind of, you know, go on social media, go on shows and yell at each other and not actually try to accomplish anything. So, yeah, you're going to kind of get me into that. So, and no, you don't need to get to a 60 vote threshold in theory, but that's part of the problem right now because you have weak Republican leadership that doesn't run Congress the way it's supposed to be run. There was never anything in the Constitution that said you had to get 60 votes to pass. You have to get 60 votes to get rid of a filibuster. But the whole point is if Maria Cantwell and Ted Cruz both can lobby people on their side, they're going to get enough on both sides to get rid of any potential filibuster options there. But I don't think that you're going to need to get to a filibuster to pass this. I don't think this is the kind of thing that is going to be considered something that is the same as like the SAVE Act or immigration policy or tax policy or war powers resolutions. I don't think this is in the same ballpark as that. So I don't think it's going to need to get to 60. We've seen bills passed this year that have passed with. We saw a bill pass recently, Trev, that had like 48 votes because it was like 48 to 45 because not even everybody voted. And we've seen bills passed in this session of Congress where the vice president has had to break a 50-50 tie, which is how it's set up. So I don't know that this is going to fall under that category of, it's going to have to go to this. So that's kind of where I'm at on that, Trev. I think it's going to get passed. I just know what version it's going to get passed of. And will we like the things about it? Because I want the things that I like. Look, here's what I like. I like the sports agent aspects where they're, it's stricter. They can take less money. There's more guidelines for what agents have to be. Does that stay the same? The office of the student athlete ombudsman was kind of odd. I mean, is that in theory, it sounds good, but has it just become another bloated NCAA bureaucracy that doesn't actually do what it's stated to do? Like the committees that would determine whether kids could or couldn't get transfer exemptions before the current system came to play, where one kid who's literally got a dying mother doesn't get granted access, but another kid who claims somebody said a bad word to me gets access right away to transfer. Like, is it something like that? That's my fear, is that some of this stuff they're saying, hey, NCAA, we expect you to take care of it. I'm like, dude, that's why we're here in the first place, because the NCAA can't take care of it. But somehow the office of the student athlete ombudsman is going to be created, from what I read, by the NCAA, because it says the Intercollegiate Athletics Association, which in this instance would be the NCAA. And for JUCOs, it'd be like the NJCAA, whatever that would be. Mid-season, the coaching stuff, I tend to like. This is something that coaches and agents should be all about. They won't be, because they're only going to look at it from one side. And that one side is, we want to be able to leave. What some of them aren't smart enough to figure out is this is also going to protect you in some ways from getting fired in the middle of the season. Because there's no point in firing a coach in the middle of the season now, because you can't hire his replacement anyway until well after the season. So you don't have to speed up that process. You may still do that. So that gives a coach a chance to maybe finish strong and things along those lines. So that's kind of, wise. But like transfer protections, I support that. The years of eligibility, I'm not a huge fan of, but that's just where we are. I'm also not so against it that I kind of like the idea of redshirting, but I would keep it the way that it is now. But I'm also not someone who's like, I can't believe they're going to whatever, because like this doesn't mean so now I got to deal with Jalen Smith for 5 years. No, because Jalen Smith's still going to leave in 3 years. What this means is, instead of this stupid, you can play 4 games and the playoffs and still save your red shirt, just shut up and just let the kid play however much you want to play him. You know what I mean? And so I get it. The reason I like red shirts is I think a red shirt takes some pressure off young people. It's literally just an emotional thing of like, hey man, you're going to red shirt. Just let's focus on class, learning, you have to worry about it. But when there is no red shirt, it's like, well, why am I not playing? So I think that's where I'm coming from, but it's not something I'm going to pound on the table and say, you've got to keep the red shirt. Yeah. I like the idea of medical exceptions. If a kid misses a year, being able to come back for an additional year. But again, you can play 5 still, and now there's no red shirt. I mean, before it was like you red shirt, then you get a medical. And that's how you got your extra year, because you already had a year you took off. Well, if you have an injury now, you're still going to get a chance to play 4 years. So I'm okay with it, even though that's not something I necessarily am fired up about. So in this part of the bill, Trev, there are a lot of things I liked. It's just how strong will they be?
You and I see a lot of that the same. There's a lot in this bill that I do really, really like. Big picture, do I think it gets passed? Yes, I do. My concerns right now and the fears of it not being passed, what hills is either side being not Republican or Democrat, but what side of people who want this bill passed versus the people who don't? What hills are they willing to die on for those? Like, what will, guys like Ted Cruz or women like Maria Cantwell, the hill that they will die on is like, no, this has to be in the bill versus
Right.
the other side where it's like,
That's
no,
true.
we
That's
will
right.
not vote on this if
Right.
this is still in there. What's that hill? I
Right.
think the SEC influence, especially, is going to play a big part in this bill because of the NIL piece. I know based on how they've been this offseason and how they've been since this NIL era has started, they're going to view it in their eyes, which I believe to be incorrect, as another disadvantage to them. It's like, so now you're saying now it's capped with NIL and we've already been ravaged because of NIL, and they're not going to view it the fact that, well, really this kind of plays back into your favor because now other collectives in the Big Ten and the ACC and the Big 12 can't go and ravage your rosters the way that they used to because a donor can't just hand a kid a check for $500,000.
Right.
But they're going to view it as that. I know that's going to be where a lot of the pushback comes from. But big picture, I do think it'll be passed. I just don't know what all concessions will be made to get it.
I also could see the SEC and certain teams not liking the transfer limitations. I think that actually is something that I could see the SEC taking bigger contention with than I would even the NIL thing. Because I think in some ways the NIL thing is what the SEC wants. They want some regulation because you're not going to be able to. Kids aren't going to be making as much in a true NIL system. That's the whole point. Right. The spending is out of control. That's what they want because they can't compete with Notre Dame and Ohio State and Michigan when it comes to, Texas, when it comes to the revenue and the salaries they can pay. They don't have the same donor pool. Alabama and Georgia, and I've tried to make this point before when Notre Dame could pay nothing. You pay a kid $100,000, that's a game changer. You can pay a kid $50,000, that's a game changer. I went from nothing to $50,000. Well, now when you're paying $500,000 and Notre Dame's paying $300,000, kids like, well, I'm still going to have hundreds of thousands of dollars, and now I get to take advantage of going to Notre Dame and doing this and doing that and doing the other thing. But in a lot of ways, it's like, oh, $500,000, okay, well, we're Notre Dame. Let me call up this big donor. Hey, man, we got to come up a couple $100,000 to get this kid. Cool, no problem. And then you can't get into a bidding war with Notre Dame if they really want a kid. If they really want a kid, you're not going to win a bidding war with Texas if that's what's required, or Ohio State if that's what's required. And they know that, and that's why they don't like this. So I actually think some of the NIL stuff they'll like. I think the transfer stuff they're not going to like because there's a lot of SEC schools, and they're not the only ones. There's ACC schools, but I don't know that Louisville's going to be swinging a big stick in this conversation like the SEC schools that, and this isn't just football, especially in basketball, where they're building their entire teams in the portal. And so, I think that's an interesting thing. Now, for Notre Dame, this doesn't affect Notre Dame at all because the players they've gotten that have been third-time transfers, like DJ McKinney's a third-time transfer, under this bill, he'd still be able to transfer to Notre Dame because he's graduating. He's a college graduate now, which was one of the exceptions. You can transfer a second time based on if you graduate from college. I can't think of anybody else that you'd see limited by this, Trev. So I don't think this impacts Notre Dame negatively at all. Riley Leonard was a one-time transfer. Sam Hartman was a one-time transfer. Jared Dawson was a one-time transfer. Bo Collins, Malachi Fields, Jalen Stroman, Rod Hurd, DJ McKinney's a three-time transfer, but a graduate. Francis Brew, Tion Gray, Ty Washington. I can't think of anybody they've gotten that's a two-time transfer that wasn't a graduate. So it's not the kid that's like been at 5 schools or 4 schools in 4 years kind of thing, which is what we need to get rid of. Because that is not good for – it's not only not good for the sport, it's not good for young people.
100%.
And that's what I was trying to explain to Mr. Morgan yesterday was this isn't a situation where it's about – I don't really care about protecting the schools per se. I care about looking out for young people. And so when I explained here's why the one-time transfer thing, and I'll summarize basically what I said was, I said it's better for opportunities to – this is the first thing that I said. Actually, let me just pull that up. here real quick, Trev, and then people can kind of see it. So just make that a little bigger, because I think this is something that when people advocate for one-time transfers, I think they make bad arguments. And I make a very pro-player argument, in my opinion, but also pro-game, making it, it's better for the game to have that. But so my number one point was it's better for their opportunities to earn a legitimate education. Notice I said education, not a degree. Continuity from an academic support standpoint is beneficial. Continuity from an advisory standpoint is beneficial. And staying on a consistent track to getting an education and then getting a degree is beneficial. So, for example, a lot of kids will have different advisors during their careers, but in a lot of instances, kids will have one advisor. Or if they move advisors because they move to another program, they change their major, the two advisors know each other. They work together. They're on campus, and they can kind of say, listen, this kid has these strengths and weaknesses as a student, and that's why we've tried to steer them towards this professor. So some students are great at taking notes and processing and giving, answers in a verbal back and forth, but they're not great when they've got to put pen to paper. Some kids are great with essays. Some are not. Some are great with, research paper. Some are not. And not every professor teaches or requires the information to be served back to them in the same way. So you may say, listen, this kid just does not process hour-and-a-half long lectures very well. He's better in more of a give and take format. So this professor tends to be more hands-on. They work in groups. They talk through things, where this professor's just lecture. So we're going to try a good advisor will then try to steer that student athlete or a student period towards, hey, you may want to take Professor, Trowbridge because, having gotten to know you a little bit, these are the type of formats you learn better. Not every student learns the same way. And so let's take Professor Trowbridge because, his teaching style is going to be better. And not that it's an easier class, harder class, but look, man, you're not great at this. You're great at this. And for hey, you need to take Professor Driscoll because you really thrive in the long form. You just hear and consume it, and you're great at then giving it back in his 15-page paper at the end of the semester. So you're going to want to take Professor Driscoll because you like this. And that's hard to know when a kid's been at 4 different schools in 4 years. How does he learn? So that continuity, that consistency is very important for young people. And that's hard to do when you've been at 4 schools in 4 years.
100%.
So those are positives, in my opinion. Limiting the number of free transfers, I think, also limits tampering dramatically. Once a kid's made one transfer, he's off your board. You're not going to go pay for a kid to come sit out a year. You're just not going to do it. You're not going to do it nearly as often. So once a kid makes a decision to leave, it's now, okay, well, I don't have to worry about going out and trying to, like next year, Notre Dame gets Mylan Graham, Quincy Porter, Francis Brew, Tion Gray, all guys that we're excited about because they have multiple years of eligibility. Jaden Sanders. Here's the deal. Notre Dame's got to re-recruit those guys to stay next year because schools are going to continue to come after them to try to get them to go back in the portal. Well, if this bill were passed, they wouldn't have to worry about that. So that's part of it too. Also, Andrew Gilmore, man, you're making arguments in the chat that literally, if you'd read the bill, you wouldn't be making. So I'd encourage you to read the bill. There are protections for student athletes. You can't just take a kid's scholarship away unless he's done some violation. So I'd say take a deep breath and read the bill first, because you're making arguments that have nothing to do with what reality is. You're arguing theory, not what actually is going on. So I'm not taking a shot at you. I'm just, the thing you're talking about right now is actually addressed in the bill that we didn't get in all. It's 111 pages. We can't get into all of it, but there are protections that say you can't just take a kid's scholarship away. It even said in there for roster management decisions. You can't force a kid out. So there are some things in there, but anyway, just wanted to kind of remind that, but I think that pushes, I said it pushes back against some of the predatory aspects of the game has become, where we've seen it firsthand, Trev, where agents convince players to jump in the portal because they want to get the money, as opposed to, hey, this kid's in a great spot. It's great for him academically. It's a great environment for him to learn and develop as a player and all this, but he's not going to get paid more at this school. So let me convince him to jump into the portal because Notre Dame needs a quarterback next year. And I know my kid's transferred already, but I know that with Notre Dame in the mix, we can drive that price way up, even if he decides to stay. And so it's very predatory, where if the kid's already transferred, it's like, I don't have to worry about that anymore. And so I think that there's parts of it. And I also think that my final piece was it does put more emphasis on high school recruiting, because you can't just reload every single year with a bunch of kids, because every year the pool of guys that can transfer, proven players that can transfer, gets smaller and smaller once guys make those decisions. And a final piece to me, Trev, is I do believe that the transfer portal aspect, I do think also it's better for young people from a development standpoint. If you're going to transfer, you have to put a lot more thought into it now. I think coaches have to cater a lot to student athletes now in ways that I don't think is healthy for student athletes, where you got to be careful how hard you're going to push a kid because he may just jump in a portal because he's got his feelings hurt. You're going to think through that a little bit more now. Your agent's going to be forced to tell you, hey, man, because like if an agent's greedy and he knows, and this rule's passed, here's what the agent knows. Hey, bruh, transferring now after your freshman year where you hardly played is the worst time to transfer. You have your value has never been lower. So sure, you can go in the portal if you want, if you're unhappy about playing time, but just know your market value is low. You're not going to get paid a whole lot. So stick it out, blah, 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 blah. And then, and so whereas now, like, cool, jump in, because if we take you over here and you do well, then we're just going to jump back in next year and your value is going to go up again. And so kids make a lot more emotional decisions. They also are more susceptible to being influenced, where agents are going to, even a greedy agent who does not care what's best for the player and is only looking out for himself, the worst of the worst, is going to be smart enough to say, bro, I don't know if now's the time for you to jump in the portal. You can play this year. Like Bama's not going to throw a bag at you, because you were third string defensive end in Notre Dame who didn't play. They're not going to throw a bag at you. They're going to throw a bag at the kid who played last year for somebody. This isn't the time to jump in right now just because you're mad at the coach. But now coaches can be more like, hey, I'm going to tell you what you don't want to hear because this is what's best for you. So I think that's good for young people as well, and it's good for programs also. So that's the transfer stuff is probably my favorite thing to come out of this, because here's the deal, Trev. If they don't change the NIL stuff at all and they change the transfer portal, that helps. Doesn't fix it all, but it helps, because you'll no longer see Damon Wilson still playing at Missouri, or he transfers to Miami from Georgia, because he doesn't go to Missouri knowing he can go somewhere else the next year. He's got to think, do I really want to do this? So that's kind of a piece to this puzzle too, Trev, is that. So I do think that is a thing that I hope doesn't change a whole lot. I hope they keep that one-time free transfer rule. And then after that, coach leaves, discontinuous of sport, sexual assault or harassment, or a kid graduates. That's good. Those are good things. So that was probably my favorite part about all this, Trev. What say you as we wrap up this first part?
Yeah, mine is split between NIL and the transfer portal rules. I mean, coaches will still come and go. Like I do like that there are now parameters around, when a coach can leave, but coaches will still be hired and fired at a relative same volume, despite what this says. I do like putting the handicap on what some agents can make. I do appreciate that, but my two biggest takeaways are the transfer portal and NIL. Pay for play has completely ruined the sport. Mm-hmm. And that at the high school recruiting level, at the transfer portal, that's how you're starting to get
to developing young people. There's
100%.
just so many. Yes, Trev, it impacts so many ways. Sorry, continue.
Oh, no, you're good, man. I mean, it's just one of those things that I think has really been a major detriment to the sport. And so fixing those two things above all else is what this bill needs to focus on, in my view, because if you do that, that is a massive step forward in the right direction for the game. Those are the two assets of the bill, the facets of the bill that I appreciate and I really, really like the most. if I had to choose between one of the two, it would be the transfer portal for a lot of the reasons that you listed out. But in a perfect scenario, in a perfect world, those are the two things that within the bill that I think have to remain. Or else we're just talking about when coaches can or can't leave and agents can't make as much, but kids are still transferring 5 times in 6 years.
Right.
Or things like that. I mean, the eligibility one I would like to fix as well, but it's one of those where it's like for every Mohamed Toure, for every Max Johnson, there's 53 and outs in college football. You know what I mean? So that I would like those to be fixed, but not before the NIL and the portal. I'm really hoping a lot of those things get fixed.
Yep. Do you share my skepticism my optimism, or are you more skeptical that this gets passed? There's some people I've listened to today that are basically saying like this won't pass. Like most are. I mean, some are saying like, hey, it's going to get passed, but it's going to look different. How much difference? The question. There's some saying this just won't get passed. I do have a fear, like down low, that this may not get passed, because here's the fear that I have, and I want to get your thoughts on this. My fear is that coaches, especially and conference commissioners, they're so narrow-minded in what they think, and so I don't know, greedy is the right word. I think some instances just dumb, and other instances is just solely focused on what's best for us. We don't give a crap about the rest of it. That they will throw the whole thing out because they don't like one part of it that doesn't benefit them. The Big Ten and SEC especially are so unwilling to do anything that doesn't give them a competitive advantage that I think they're willing to kill this if they don't get to maintain their competitive advantages. Because let's be real, the only thing the SEC keeps crying about is because they no longer have the same competitive advantage they had before. That's their beef. And that's my fear, is that you're going to get some conference commissioners that wield a big stick and are able to convince presidents of things that, hey, this is why we're going to say no to this, because we want something that has this. But in reality, that's not going to pass, because you have, and I also think they have they think they wield the same power here that they do with the College Football Playoff Committee, where they have all the power, those two conferences. The reality is there's a lot of schools in the ACC and the Big 12 and the Pac-12, the new Pac-12 and the AC. And like, you got to think, there's 2 schools from California in the ACC now. There's a school that has a lot of money in Texas in the ACC now, including obviously schools in Florida, 2 schools in Florida. Those are 3 big states with a lot of representatives and a lot, you know what I mean? Like they're going to have more say in this, in my opinion, than they do what's happening in the college football playoff expansion. And I don't know that the Big Ten and SEC understand that. And that's my fear, that they're going to sabotage the whole thing, because there's things being put in play here that do cut in to the competitive advantage that they have now and have had for a long time. And I'm not talking just the media rights. I'm talking about also this stuff as well. And that's my concern, ultimately, about whether or not I'm confident that it gets passed or not. What say you?
Yeah, that was a lot of what I was referring. I agree with you. That's a lot of what I was referring to with the SEC not comprehending what the NIL is supposed to do. Your explanation of how it would actually benefit the SEC was sound. That I agree with. My fear is their ability to understand your explanation of why this would help out the SEC. Because I think that they're just going to look at it in one way and just see, oh, it's limiting NIL capabilities, and we're already struggling to retain players because of lack of funding. They're not going to see the inverse and the other side of the coin of, no, this helps you because it also limits the other schools. That's what I'm afraid of. Out of the SEC, out of the Big Ten, I think they're going to view it as so you're giving more power back to the SEC when we just fought so hard to take away all of the competitive advantages that they had within the sport. Now the Big Ten has won 3 national championships in a row. That's my fear overall. Big picture confidence level, I think this does get passed. But my fear is that there are so many concessions made that it's like, okay, well, this isn't even the original bill anymore.
And it doesn't even actually change anything.
Right. Like there's so
We've
many
codified into
amendments to it.
law the same stupidity that's hurting us now. Agree.
Yes, that is my biggest fear, where they can sit there and say, well, hey, we got the Protect College Sports Act passed. And yeah, that's great, but it covers none of what it was intended to cover. Yeah, you limited transfer portal in that. Now they have to sit out a semester. So people transfer before the winter is over and then just sit out in the spring. They're ready to go the next season. I have a lot of those fears as well. So it'd be very interesting to see how it plays out. That's for sure. Brian, we're talking about the Protect College Sports Act here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We just spent a lot of time talking about a lot of the facets of the bill that we liked and whether we think it's going to be passed, the limitations it puts on transfer portal and trying to regulate NIL. But there was another big piece of this bill that was very interesting, and it was talking about pooling media rights. And basically, it's the Protecting College Sports Act. It's trying to provide a pathway for changing media rights in college football, because let's be real right now, there are two main powers in this sport, in the Big Ten and the SEC, that are kind of they swing the proverbial biggest sticks when it comes to the money made in TV rights. Some of it I understand, some of it has gone a little bit too far. They're looking to amend different things from the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961. They're looking to continue some of the things from that Sports Broadcasting Act. So this is a very interesting part of the bill.
Yeah, Trev, this is the one that also I will readily admit was the most challenging for me to grasp. There was a lot more of the language. I'm like, yeah, I'm not really quite sure what the heck they're freaking talking about here.
Yep.
A lot of it was also amending the 1961 Sports Broadcasting Act. And so let's just kind of dive into it a little bit and talk about it as best we can. If people in the chat have more insight into this, please feel free to intro. But basically, at the heart of this is you're seeing now in this bill a push to do what we have seen a lot over the last year, which is a desire to pool media rights for TV and other broadcasting platforms, with TV being the primary, into sort of one pool, one big fund that everybody gets paid out of. That doesn't necessarily mean that everybody gets the same amount. And I don't know the practicality of, okay, well then who's on what networks? There's a lot that goes into it, but essentially that's what we see in professional sports. That and again, it's different when there's 32 teams compared to 138. That's why I say it's never a good idea to do direct comparisons between NFL and college sports. But in this case, I'm simply using it as that's an example of what it looks like to pool media into one. So, for example, if right now, I always get them back, who's on Fox and who's on CBS right now, Trev?
The NFC is on Fox and the AFC is on CBS.
So AFC's on CBS, Fox has the NFC. Used to be the AFC when I grew up was on NBC. Right now, NBC just does what? The Sunday Night Football.
Sunday night, yes, sir.
So let's say NBC's like, man, we miss having the NFL on, blah, 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 blah. When that CBS contract runs out, because you said CBS has the AFC, correct? Because when I grew up, is NBC had AFC, CBS had NFL. And then Fox got involved. I think for a while, Fox then had the NFC, and it's been all over. But anyway, let's say NBC said we miss having NFL on Saturday. We miss having all those games. We've got new leadership. We're going to invest. We're going to make a bid to get the AFC back when their contract with. So, and I don't think they often. I don't know if they all like are at the same time. I don't know if like I think that they do. That they're both negotiating at the same time, I think, but I'm not sure of that. That's just more of a kind of a loose recollection from 15, 20 years ago. Trev's looking that up now. But NBC then gets the AFC. NFC has got this. They're paying whatever they want. If NBC gives more to get the AFC than what Fox is paying or to have the NFC, that doesn't mean AFC teams now have more money than NFC teams do. Because it all gets pulled into one and everybody gets the same amount of money. That's essentially what we're talking about here. Now, it'll look a lot different in college sports when you have 138 Division I football teams and over 300 Division I teams that play basketball and other sports. What is it like what's the number in college basketball? It's over 300, correct? That play Division I. So FCS and FBS and all that are part of it. And then football is the driver of this. So it's really the 138 that matter, I believe, at this point in time.
The NFL also does renegotiate all of the networks at the same time.
Okay.
It runs through 2032 right now.
But they don't pay the same amount per league, right? So you can but it all goes into one, right? I am correct on that, right? It all goes into one. Same thing in Major League Baseball as far as the TV deals. Now, Major League Baseball is different because they also have like local broadcasting rights and things like that. So, I mean, so they're all different, but like the big deals with ESPN and all that, those all go into one. There's a big push to have that happen because the argument being made in the pro pooling media rights people is if you do it right, it actually elevates everyone. You know, the Big Ten and the SEC are still going to make a ton of money, but now the ACC and the Big 12 and these other are too, and that's better for the sport as a whole. I'm actually sympathetic to that argument because I understand what the law says. The Big Ten and the SEC are not doing anything illegal, but what they are doing is they are benefiting in a way that creates a competitive disadvantage, and that it based on something that has nothing to do with whether you're coaching better or recruiting better, harder, or better strategy, or whatever the case may be. It's simply that you're just out spending because you happen to have more big TV markets, or not even big TV markets, but even more so, you're in a part of the country that has, I would argue, I don't know if I hate this right, at times an unhealthy obsession with college football. Like, I mean, is that fair?
Yeah, it's fair.
Where other parts of the country just don't. So it's not Stanford's fault that Californians don't largely care about college sports the way they used to. They don't. It's not a positive. It's not a negative. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing in general in life. I'm just saying that's the reality. Or they happen to just be from areas where maybe there isn't a traditional, aspect to it. And so what that has done is that has caused those leagues to take an even bigger hit, because then those conferences that are already doing better can go poach the big money teams that you had in your league. So you take Oklahoma and Texas out of the Big 12. You take USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon out of the Pac-12, and those conferences die. There's some things in here to try to protect against that. But the thought being, pooling it now, it doesn't bring down the SEC and the Big 10. It lifts up the ACC and the Big 12. That's the argument. Now, we could debate whether or not that would work or not. That's a different conversation for a different day, but that's the argument. And I'm not trying to have that argument right now. We're just simply trying to lay out what this is about. That's where this is coming from. It's trying to create an opportunity where there's more. I mean, there's just teams that right now have no chance to compete for a championship because the TV money in their league just isn't good enough. So unless they get a Cody Campbell type of donor, they have no chance to compete right now. And so it's funny listening to the Big Ten and the SEC cry about they want more opportunity to play for championships. That's why they want automatic bids. But the minute you bring up pooling media rights, which would what, Trevor? Create more opportunities for teams to field championship rosters. No. We don't want that. No. Well, hold on now. If the money you're making and the money the ACC is making and the money the Big 12 is making is in the Pac-12, if it's the same and every school's in the Power Four is making the same, doesn't that create an environment where more teams now have an opportunity to build a team that can compete for a championship? Isn't that what you guys wanted? No. We don't want that. We like hoarding all the money, and we want to expand the playoffs for us, not them. That's what it's about. So they're hypocrites. So you can't advocate, in my opinion, you can't advocate for a 2014 playoff using opportunity to play for a championship in one breath while then saying we don't want to pull media rights in the other breath. You can't, because those two things are trying to accomplish the same thing. And so that's what makes this debate super interesting. And notice nobody at ESPN will say this, which frustrates me, because like even the people that are against expansion or unwilling to say, hold on a second, how can you be against this if you're supporting that? How can you be pro 2014 playoff? And you've stated it's because you want more opportunity for teams to compete. More teams deserve a chance to play for a championship. How can you support that with that argument and then say we're against pooling media rights? Because at the end of the day, it's not about opportunity for a championship. They know that getting to the playoff means more money. That's what it's all about. But they're not willing to say it. So I'm very interested to see how this debate is going to rage. And we'll get into specifics of it, Trev, but I did want to at least lay the groundwork for what this is about and what this debate is about.
This part of the bill is fascinating because the other thing that it does go on to talk about is that if this bill does get passed, this is a voluntary aspect of the bill, meaning how I'm interpreting this is everything else in this bill. Like if the Protect College Sports Act gets passed, there is no debate around the 5 years of eligibility. There is no debate around capping agents at 5%. There is no debate around teams can choose to partake in the transfer portal rule. That's just what the rule is. Whereas this part of the bill and pooling media rights would be if the Protect College Sports Act gets passed, then teams will have the option to vote for pooling media rights. I think that's the interesting part about this. Then who starts playing the under the table deals? Like that's where a lot of my concern with this one lies. We'll get into that here in a little bit, but all encompassing, I think this is a fascinating part of the bill because in theory, my own opinions on this, but in theory, everybody benefits from this. Mm-hmm. Like the SEC and the Big Ten will still make their money. But then it also brings along conferences like the ACC, the Big 12, the Mountain West, the Pac-12. In theory, that's what this does. But I'll be very interested to see what happens as far as the negotiation with that, because I would also be remiss in saying that the Big 12 and the SEC will split everything evenly across the board.
Yep. Now that will be something that's very interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah.
Because here's what can't work, here's what won't work, and here's what's honestly not fair. But also, you could point out hypocrisy of what I'm about to say. So I'm aware of the difficulty of what I'm about to say. I don't think it's fair, or I don't even say fair is not the right word. I don't think it makes sense to say that the American Conference or the MAC Conference, the Mid-American Conference, should then get the same amount. Like Bowling Green should not get the same amount of money as Ohio State. That conference doesn't they should not be compared. Now, looking at the ACC compared to the Big Ten, that's a different conversation. But you can't say that and then also be willing to say, but Rutgers deserves the same amount as Ohio State. That's what makes this challenging, Trev, is if you pull it, how do you separate P4 from G5? And then within P4, how do you handle what Texas is getting and Ohio State is getting and compare that to what Baylor's getting or what Minnesota's getting or what Rutgers is getting? Because they just don't have the same TV revenue. And so, or same TV, eyes, and they're not bringing as much to the table. So it's in some ways, I think it's a very easy conversation to have when you're just talking big picture and what it may do and why you're doing it. It's easy to lay out why you're doing it. It's where it gets difficult is, well, practically, how does this work at this level?
Yep.
It's easier to understand it, how it would work in the NFL. It's 32 teams. Everybody makes the same amount. Everybody follows the same rules. It's all part of one league. Here, it's completely different. And then somebody said you could tier it by viewership, but then that's where we're back to where we are now, where the haves are always going to dominate the have-nots because they have so much more money. And now we're not pooling it. The whole point of pooling it is to create some level of, when it comes to media revenue, it's the same. Now, so if you want to be able to spend with Texas, then you've got to get donors. You've got to, you've got to put a more attractive product on the field. You've got to figure some things out with local, rights to your radio broad. You got to do other things to say, hey, we got to compete with them. But we've been able to get enough TV revenue to where we can now get in within striking distance to do some of these kind of things. So it's not, I mean, look, the way I laid it out at the beginning, it's like, dude, that sounds pretty simple. That makes sense, but it's not. Like, that's what I'm saying. The big picture is easier to discuss than how does this actually practically work in a league with 108 teams? And then in for football revenue, and then of course it's even different for basketball revenue because those leagues have contracts for basketball as well. The Big West has a basketball league. They don't have a football conference that's at the Division I level. I think they have a FCS version, but like the Big East doesn't have a football league. How does it affect them? So there's a lot of things that factor into this, Trev, that practically speaking are going to make it difficult, but they do speak to some of that stuff in this. I mean, if I'm reading the bill correctly, and again, this is why I'm hoping that some of you have read the bill and you can give feedback on what we're saying, because again, we've said at the beginning, like, I'm not sure. This is the part I had the most challenging time understanding. It almost sounds like they're saying without saying, we'd like to go back to the old conference structure, or at least bring back those rivalries, to where we don't need an 18-team Big Ten if the Pac-12 teams would be making the same amount of money as the Big Ten teams. What's the reason for USC and Oregon and Washington to stay in the Big Ten if they'd make the same amount of money playing in the Pac-12? Because here's why that matters. Well, why not just stay in the Big Ten? Because it costs them a lot more money to play in the Big Ten. And the way that the TV structure was set before is, even if you take out, so let's just throw a number out there, $80 million is what they're making. I think they ended up total compensation was close to like $100 million this year for the Big Ten. I believe I saw something like that, Trev. But let's just say $80 million just for argument's sake. And in the Pac-12, they were making $35 million. It's just, I'm not confessing and saying those are the numbers. I'm just making a point. I know it was a huge difference. So let's say you have to spend $10 million more in travel to play in the Big Ten. You're going to do that if you're making, what did I say, 80 to 35, $45 million more in TV arena, but you're willing to spend $10 million more on travel for all your sports. If you're now both making 70, it is stupid for you to remain in the Big Ten, because now you're losing more money compared to Ohio State, because Ohio State's traveling, within a region mostly where you're always going somewhere. So it's the travel for USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington is going to be greater than it is for all the teams that are kind of in a more geographically aligned. Same thing for Stanford and Cal in the ACC. Same thing for SMU in the ACC. So you look at that and say, okay, there's no more need for that. Now, if a team wants to be independent, they can be independent if they want to go back to that. Or you can go back to a smaller ACC. The Big East can bring football back now if they so choose. There's a lot more to it. I mean, you're still under contract to be in the Big Ten for X number of years, and there's things like that. But I'm sure the Big Ten would say, well, if this rule passes, USC, there's no point in us having you in the league. If you guys want to leave, we'll let you get out. I would be curious what they would do, because now you're not getting the same benefit of having the LA market. There still may be a desire to keep it for a time because you still want to get your teams in that market for other reasons beyond just TV revenue. There's marketing and other things like that go along with it. But I'm curious how that would impact the leagues. And then the other thing they have in here, Trev, is they basically made rules saying that you can't take over other leagues. Now, I don't know if that would, like, some people have said that prevents expansion. I don't know that I read it that strongly. I think it's more about you just can't absorb an entire league. So you can't form, I think it was more about you can't form the super league that breaks away from the NCAA. That's what I think they're pushing back against, more so than the Big Ten can't expand. I didn't take the language as the Big Ten can't expand. I think what would prevent the Big Ten from expanding is there'd be no need to expand if the media rights pooling happens. What would you be expanding for?
Right.
You'd want to condense the geographical nature of your conference, not expand it.
Yeah, I do think you hit on something key that I want to touch on, because Cantwell talked a lot about wanting to bring back regionalism in sports. She thought that was great for the sport. Regional rivalries were great for the sport, and that's where a lot of my opinions are based on, is what is good for the sport. And yeah, I know initially the Big Ten and the SEC would be against pooling their media rights, because as of right now, they would have to, in their eyes, make less money potentially, and then spread that out across 18 teams. But to your point, if the conferences go back to resembling what they maybe just even what they were back in like 2015, not even what they were like back in the 90s and the 80s, when you had like all these independent teams and you had the Big Eight and things like that. Like, if the Big Ten just goes back to resembling somewhat close to having 10 teams, let's just say they go from making $80 million in this hypothetical scenario to like $70 million. So they take a $10 million hit in this hypothetical scenario. That $70 million spread across 10 to 12 teams goes significantly farther than spreading it across 18 teams. Like, I think ultimately that was one of the goals of this, and hopefully it ends up coming to fruition. It's just again, I go back to what we talked about in the first segment of the ability to comprehend the bigger picture here is what I'm afraid of. But yeah, I think that could absolutely be a thing. I think it would make regional sports more competitive. Yeah. I think it would make things like the odds on FanDuel for who wins what conference and who plays for what conference title would be extremely more competitive. You'd get to see old rivalries. Like, what was one of the big ones that ended with conference realignment? Like Bedlam, right? That's gone.
Bedlam ended. Yep. Oklahoma State, Texas A&M ended when A&M left for the ACC. It's now back, but it originally ended. Nebraska, Colorado has gone away when Nebraska went to Nebraska had multiple they had a great rivalry with Oklahoma. They had the great rivalry with Colorado. That went away. Now their rival's Iowa, which is like really forced. Notre Dame USC has gone away because of USC joining the Big Ten. There's been a lot of those rivalries that are gone now because of that. Oregon State is going away. I think they played last year. I don't know if they play this year. But let me see here. I don't think they play this year, but I could be completely wrong on that. I know it's going. Yeah, they don't play this year. They play Oklahoma State, but not Oregon State. So the Civil War is gone. There's been talk about moving Michigan and Ohio State off of the last weekend. There's so many things about this that have gone away that it's not. Texas had some pretty good Big 12 rivalries that, gone away. Some old Southwest Conference rivalries that have gone away. Fortunately, we've kept the Texas-Oklahoma rivalry, but who knows how long that stays the same. So we've seen a lot of this. Some of them are, like a little bit more not as big as others, but even still, we've seen a lot of those great rivalries just kind of fall by the wayside because of this. Honestly, Notre Dame lost a lot of their big rivalries because of going to the ACC. So let's pretend like Notre Dame has always wanted to keep these wonderful rivalries, and woe is Notre Dame, and they had to give those rivalries up to play 5 ACC games. They couldn't play Pitt every year, BC every year, Michigan every year, USC every year, blah, 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 if they're in the ACC, because then there's just not enough slots. And the whole point of joining the ACC is all the ACC teams want their shot at playing Notre Dame. So you can't play all these teams. So it's not like we have pushed back on this notion that Notre Dame killed the USC rivalry. USC killed that, and we explained why. We explained how USC saying, well, we were ready to play and Notre Dame backed out. Nonsense. Notre Dame was willing to give in to a lot of the demands USC made, but they literally could not do it in the next 2 years. And USC used that, plus the whole, we didn't know that they had the buys to get out. Notre Dame met USC's demands throughout the process, and USC kept moving the goalposts. So we blame USC for that. But we're not going to sit here and be holier than thou overall and act like Notre Dame kept all their great rivalries over the years, and it's everyone else's fault that they're not playing Pitt all the time anymore. Nope, I'm not saying that. We know Notre Dame chose to give up those rivalries to join the ACC. That's part of the reason they gave up the Michigan rivalry. Now, I'm okay with that, as we've discussed, and I don't think that's the same as the Navy or USC rivalry. But Notre Dame is part of this process too, Trevor, with this conference expansion. We're not going to pretend like Notre Dame is just this
100%.
innocent bystander that has done no wrong in this process. There's a lot of great rivalries that I wish would come back for Notre Dame. I do wish they played Pitt every year. I do wish they played BC more. I do wish they were still playing USC, just not in the terms in which USC wanted. But the only reason USC wanted those is A, their coach is a coward, and B, because they joined the Big Ten. So this looks to address those things. I just don't know how to make some of this work practically. That's what I struggled with. There was also some things in here that if you agree to this, you're agreeing to keep women's sports scholarship numbers and Olympic sports scholarship numbers at their current rate. That was another part. So, because the whole point is this, listen, if we're helping you with the pay for play thing, which is going to bring down the amount of money you're going to spend on this, then, and we're going to pull this to where, yeah, it hurts this 25% of the teams, but it's going to benefit the other 75% of the teams, because that's what this comes down to. Right now, 15% of the teams are dominating the discussions of what happens in the sport. I don't like that. Even though Notre Dame is one of those teams that's part of that. I mean, if we're looking at this selfishly, like, none of this hurts Notre Dame at all. Notre Dame's going to be good either way. But we're not going to sit there and lie to you and act like, man, Notre Dame is just beholden to, as you see every time these new things come about, Notre Dame is absolutely in there swinging a big stick. That's why they got the exception, the built-in, the crazy rule that I understand people are so upset about, that if Notre Dame ranks in the top 12, they get a quote unquote, from Steve Sarkisian, free spot into the playoff, which is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. But still, the only reason Notre Dame got that exception is because they still wield a lot of power. So Notre Dame is in the in group here. This isn't us upset about how it hurts our team, so let's push back. No, I'm willing to say this is good for the whole sport, because we shouldn't have 15 to 25. And I say 15% because Vanderbilt and Minnesota and Rutgers are not pulling any weight outside of the fact that they're in a conference that's pulling a lot of weight. It's small number of teams within those two conferences, but those two conferences only make up slightly less than 25% of all of Division I football teams. So a quarter of the game is telling everyone else what to do. I don't think that's good. And so this bill is meant to push back on that, but saying, if we're going to create more revenue for most of you, and we're going to bring down your costs by getting rid of pay for play, you got to make sure that you're guaranteeing women's and Olympic sports. That's the thing that Maria Cantwell is pushing for. And honestly, I very much support her push on that. I'm a fan of that. But right now, in the way that the world is now, you can't keep all those sports because of the skyrocketing costs of all these things, on top of the fact that none of these teams know how to live within a budget. So this is one thing I support her on. I don't care that she's a Democrat and I'm not a Democrat. I don't give a rip. She's right in this push, in my opinion. And so I support that part of it. But I like how they tied it to, if you're going to do this, know that this is what you're committing to.
Yeah, 100%. I thought one of the more interesting parts of the bill was the trickle-down effect of agreeing to pool your media rights. It was that. It was bringing back regional rivalries was another piece. Like, reestablishing regional rivalries is triggered if the rights are pooled. Same thing with what you're talking about of protecting women's and Olympic sports, maintaining their scholarship levels and roster levels. It was like based on like a 3-year period of funding, but that's only triggered if the rights are pooled. So I do think that that's very interesting, that basically it almost like unlocks another level to what the Protect College Sports Act is able to do. I think that'll be very interesting as well. But that's what makes this so interesting, in my opinion, is because if the voluntary part of the bill gets enacted, which would take 75% of the 138 FBS teams, if they come to an agreement, then this gets triggered. It is fascinating.
What is also fascinating is this is actually something I believe that we are correct on, Trev. If we're reading this right now, the conferences say what they're going to do. You can give consent, you can give counsel in the meetings, but at the end of the day, Greg Sankey determines what the SEC is going to do. Tony Petitti decides what the Big Ten is going to do. If I'm reading this correctly, while you will likely see most, if not all, teams do what the conference commissioner wants, there is no rule that says, in fact, it says the opposite. An institution or the conference kind of thing, they can vote how they want to vote. So if Vanderbilt's like, hey, man, or actually, you know what, a better example might be South Carolina's like, hey, this would be great because here's the well, let me just finish. A school can vote against the conference wishes in this bill from how I'm reading it. But we talked about this, Trev. Do you agree with that after we talked through it? So if Rutgers is like, I'd love to go back to the Big East, but we can't go back to the Big East. We're getting our heads kicked in the Big Ten because we need the money. But if being in the Big East gave us the same amount of money as being in the Big Ten, then we'd rather go to the Big East. So there might be some teams in those leagues that have a vested interest in the league not looking like it does now. You know, maybe Oklahoma and Texas are like, hey, we'd actually like to go back to the Big 12 and dominate the Big 12 because apparently Texas could dominate the Big 12 with their backups. Imagine what Texas could do in that league, Trev, if they were a full-time member and they could play their starters every week. They're going to win 100-0 every week.
If only we had a sample size of knowing what Texas did in the Big 12 playing all their starters. Yeah. If only.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah.
It's one of those what ifs.
Yeah. I mean, it would be very interesting, Trev. But that's the fascinating thing is I don't think it's a given that all, 34 teams in the Power 4 level are going to do that. And then there's the flip side of that. What promises does Tony Petitti or Greg Sankey make to those teams like Florida State and UVA and Clemson that want to get out of their current leagues? Hey, man, if you vote against this, because you only need one or two schools to vote against it to say it's you can't get to the 75% threshold. Don't think there's not going to be some wheeling dealing on that side as well where hey, Florida State, hey, Clemson, if you guys promise to vote against this media pooling thing, when you guys get out of that deal in 2030, we're going to welcome you with open arms. There's going to be some wheeling and dealing in back rooms when it comes to that, Trev. Just like you're going to see the ACC or the Big 12 or somebody who is, if some guy has the money and he's smart, he's going to say, hey, let's get the Southwest Conference back together. Let's get the Big 8 back together. Let's get the Pac-10 back together. And since this is the deal, let's do this. I think you could see that. Now that might get interesting because the Pac-10 now has some teams in it. You know what I mean? But there's just so many different aspects to this that make this very interesting, Trev. Do you see just new leagues start? That's another. Do teams go independent? There's so many facets that I still don't think you're going to see a lot of teams go independent because you could do something for football, but you're still going to have a tough time getting your other sports to there. I mean, a lot of those teams that were independent back in the day were in a league for another sport. In 1988, when Notre Dame was an independent and Virginia Tech was an independent and Pitt was an independent, a lot of those teams were playing in the Big East in basketball. There just wasn't a Big East football league yet. So those are all really fascinating aspects of it. So if the Big Ten and the SEC can poach some teams over, well, it's not going to prevent other schools from poaching teams out of their league either, which is going to make it hey, Lincoln Riley, you're a coward. Jen Cohen, you're a coward. You want soft schedules. Come back to the Pac-12 and play Fresno State and these teams because you're still going to make your same amount of money in the Big Ten. You don't think that might not have an argument for those two people? Sorry, I just had to take that shot. So that's what's going to make this fascinating. This is where there's going to be the most wheeling and dealing if they've got to think that there's a chance this passes. Because the majority of people are going to say, yes, this is a way better deal than what we have right now. If you're the ACC and you're like, well, yeah, we won't make as much money as what the Big Ten and SEC are making right now, but we're going to make a whole lot more freaking money than we're making right now. Why wouldn't you vote for it? unless you're someone who wants to get into the SEC and make the money they're making now, or get into the Big Ten and make the money they're making now. So this is where greed and wheeling and dealing is going to take effect. And the people advocating for more opportunity are going to be working hard to prevent opportunity for more people to get better. And that's what I really like about this little tidbit, is because people are being exposed for being hypocrites and frauds when they say, no, we want 24 teams because it opens up more opportunity. Well, hold on a second. Then why don't you support pooling media rights? Does that not make it easier for the ACC and the Big 12 and the Pac-12 and these other leagues to then be more competitive against you? Creates more opportunity for playoffs.
Before we move on and talk about the SEC, Brian, I did have a question, and this is
I have
genuine
one for you too. But
Cool.
So when we're done with this one, don't move on yet, because I have a question for you as well.
Yeah, you got it. This is coming from I genuinely don't know and how this would work, but if there is a pooling of media rights, sounded like I just said media rights, but what would happen to Notre Dame? Because I don't know what happens with independent schools if there's a pooling of media rights. Notre Dame's really the only independent school we're talking about. We could talk about UConn football, but what would happen to an independent school if they pool media rights? Does Notre Dame still just kind of cash its check from NBC and then everybody else works out a deal, or how does that work?
My understanding is I don't think this in any way forces. There's people say that it forces Notre Dame to conference. The way that I read this is you're basically being paid as an entity, not as a conference member.
Gotcha.
So I don't think this impacts Notre Dame, because it's essentially going back to a system that was similar to the way it was before the Supreme Court case in 80. Well, it started in 81 and it was finalized in 84. And we broke that down a few weeks ago. But that's why you saw more teams were independent. So I know this all happened before you were born, Trev, but the reason you had, I think, 24 independent teams in 1988 when Notre Dame won a title, and within a decade there was 3, is because when that Supreme Court case went down and all of a sudden the SEC starts making their own deal, the Big Ten starts making their own deal, the Pac-10 starts making their own deal, Notre Dame makes their own deal, that now you better jump in a conference if you want to get that payday, because we can't do what Notre Dame. If you're South Carolina or Penn State, you can't do what Notre Dame did. Virginia Tech can't do what Notre Dame did. NBC's not going to pay them a bunch of money to go just have their games there. So you better be part of a conference, because now the conference has carried all the weight. And you had to be part of a conference to make money. And you had to be part of a select number of conferences in order to make money. And now it's well, there is no special advantage to being in the SEC compared to the ACC or the Big East or the Southwest Conference when it just comes to TV revenue. Now, there may be some advantage. South Carolina may say, hey, listen, we still want to be part of the SEC, but we just don't want 18 teams or 16 teams in it. So we're going to vote against it. And then, I'm just throwing out there. I don't know that that's an argument they would make, but they may say, but we still want to stay in the SEC though. Because we don't know, there's not a natural home for us because we were an independent for so long. Now I think there was a time South Carolina used to be in the ACC, I believe. I'm going to go look that up, but I thought a long time ago, because Georgia Tech used to be in the SEC. Gosh, man. So Sewanee, who was a D3 school, was in there. I'm actually looking that up. Yeah, they were in the ACC. They haven't. South Carolina has an ACC championship. They won the ACC in 1969. Maybe it would be where South Carolina says, hey, we'd be in the ACC if it wasn't for whatever reason. And I think they were, I have to go look that up. I don't know that they left on their own volition. I'm not sure. I'd have to go do some search on that. But yeah, they were in the ACC, Trev, from 1953 to 1970. And they didn't join the SEC till 1992. They were part of the Arkansas move. Go ahead.
According to the University of South Carolina withdrew from the ACC in 1971 primarily because of a strict conference rule that mandated a minimum 800 SAT score for athletic scholarships.
Okay, that's hilarious. And they went independent. And they were part of that, that TV thing. Well, number one, TV revenue wasn't as big of a deal then. Conferences were smaller, so it was easier to find games. And then, like I said, when the TV money got in, that's when everything started to change. So that's fascinating. I'd be curious why Georgia Tech left, because Georgia Tech, Trev, has five SEC championships. People forget Georgia Tech used to be a powerhouse in football. 5 SEC championships. And John Heisman was one of their great coaches, the guy who the Heisman Trophy is named after. But they were in the SEC from, let me see here, because they won, 30s, 40s, and 50s. They won national championships. So let me see if I can find the breakdown of the conferences they were in. They were in the SEC from 1933 to 1963, then went independent from 64 to 82, and then joined the ACC in 1983.
So I found an article from the New York Times talking about why Georgia Tech withdrew from the SEC in 1964, and it was basically due to how the SEC was managing scholarships and recruiting practices. So Bobby Dodd opposed the SEC's 140 rule, which capped the total number of football and basketball players on scholarship at 140. And since it limited schools, it forced a dozen of new recruits to basically strip scholarships from underperforming or injured players, and Georgia Tech wasn't on board with that, so they left.
Interesting. And you could do that back then because you weren't driven by the power of the TV revenue. So it'd be fascinating to see if this happened. I'm way less skeptical. I'm way less confident that this part passes, even though I think this would be great for the game. I truly believe that. I think a pooling of media rights to where you didn't have just 2 conferences that just could swing this big stick and tell everybody else what to do. You get rid of that, and I think that a lot of things are different. A lot of things are different.
What was your question that you had for me?
Would you be willing, if let's say that the SEC and Big Ten said, okay, we will advise our institutions to vote for a media pool if you're willing to agree, if everyone's willing to expand to a 24-team playoff with X number of guarantees. Would you be willing to accept a 24-team playoff if it meant a pooling of the media rights, which then would kind of maybe create a power 7 or power 8 with maybe 2 to 3, depending on how many it would be. If it was 8, you don't do 3, but maybe 2 guarantees, or 3 to the Big Ten and SEC, 2 to whatever, to where basically 18 to 20 of the spots are guaranteed to the power leagues. Would you be willing to sacrifice your view? Because you and I are on the same page. We don't want a 24-team playoff. Would you be willing to sacrifice that and go with a 24-team playoff if those leagues were willing to go with a pooled media rights?
In theory, yes, I would.
Mm-hmm.
Because my biggest concern and my biggest pushback against the 2014 playoff, and I've been consistent with this with all of my pushback ever since, is because it goes away from the true meaning of what a playoff is. And I think it devalues first round games. You're basically pitting 2 teams against each other who neither have a shot at truly winning a title. In theory, if you pool media rights, you're giving teams, and I'm going off of last year's rankings, teams like Georgia Tech, Houston, Iowa, USC, Michigan, all teams that missed the playoff last year but would have made it in a 24-team playoff, you would give them more of a financial opportunity to build a championship caliber roster. So in theory, yes, I would be on board for that if that was the concession that was being made.
I also think in theory, there's an opportunity that more schools would be competitive enough to win.
Exactly. Yeah,
so that would be part of it as well. So Houston isn't facing the giant gap in revenue from TV that they currently are against Texas.
Right.
Now there's still a gap there, and but there's a reason leagues were more competitive back in the day. And you didn't necessarily have one school dominate forever like Florida State did in the ACC forever. Because why? Florida State was already a powerhouse. They came into a league that wasn't great, and then they got more money, and then they were able to kind of dominate. But a lot of leagues weren't that way. There were times when Texas dominated the Southwest Conference, times when SMU had some great teams, times when A&M had some great teams, times when Houston had some great teams. I mean, heck, Joe Montana's most famous game at Notre Dame was in the Cotton Bowl against Houston. I mean, Trev, I was alive when Houston had a Heisman Trophy winner and had the most exciting offense and all. They scored over 90 points on SMU in 1989. Literally. I mean, it was insane. Do you remember that? So it was the year that Notre Dame beat SMU like 59-6, and Notre Dame just absolutely called off the Dogs. But I believe that year, Andre Ware passed for like, oh gosh, I can't remember how many yards, but it was 90. They lost 95-21 to Houston. It was, yeah.
Andre Ware's stats at halftime, he was 25 of 41 for 517 yards and six touchdowns.
It was 59-14 at halftime.
In the second quarter alone, he passed for 340 yards and 5 touchdowns. Good.
Trev, they only scored 14 points in the fourth quarter. It's nuts. Absolutely nuts.
They set the all-time NCAA record of 1,021 total yards of offense in a single game.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
yeah.
Good night.
I remember watching the Notre Dame was up on them 39-6 at halftime of that game. And they were up 53-6 at the end of the third quarter and then just caught off the Dogs. But yeah, it was that game could have been a lot worse. Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, I will honestly, like, I would be if you were to tell me that the pooling of media means that the revenue for the 60 to 70 Power 4 teams would be basically equal, and now getting to the championship is how getting to the playoff is how you're going to be able to separate, which means now there is more investment to try to get into the 24 because getting in is going to be beneficial to you. And then the other teams are kind of somewhat dragged down a little bit, in my view. I mean, I think there's a case in which I could say, and you were to tell me that it's not going to be Power 4 anymore. So let's say the Pac-12 kind of comes back to some degree. Let's just say not all the Pac-12 teams go back, but some do. Let's say the Big 12, the Southwest coming, because like I just how do you expand it like that? Does the Mountain West get the same amount of money as? Because like here's the thing, I don't know that the Mountain West deserves the same amount of money based on where things are right now that the Big 10 gets, but I also think the Mountain West deserves more money than the MAC and the Sun Belt. It just historically it's a better league. But then if TCU and Utah and BYU were willing to go back to the Mountain West, now you can, in San Diego State, now you can make a case that the Mountain West does belong in that same field. That's what makes it really interesting, Trev, of practically how does it work. But if I knew that it would basically kill the Power 4 and make it Power 5, Power 6 or something like that, I'd be willing to sacrifice my pushback against the 2014 playoff to bring that back.
Agreed.
I would. So you got to be willing to give something. Say, look, if you need to make more money, now there is merit to. You better put a team together because if you get in the playoff and make a run, you're going to make more money. Now you're rewarding success. You're truly rewarding success. It's not just you're being rewarded because you're in a league that gets more people watching on TV. You're now getting more money because your team. You build a team that could go out there and win. Cool. Hey, Georgia, yeah, you're getting money getting into the playoff, but Notre Dame is destroying you right now. Indiana's making more money than you. Ohio State, because they're getting the playoff and they're winning. Well, now, hey, you want to start making more money? Win. The problem is the way the 2014 team playoff would be right now is there's such a big gap between the top teams and those lower teams, and the whole thing would still be filled with the same flipping conferences.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that I'd be willing to make that sacrifice if it meant changing the way that the TV money is paid out right now.
Brian, we've talked a lot about the SEC here today on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And now I figured it would be the best time to kind of talk about just the continued, I don't even know what to call it, crazy media offseason that they've had so far.
It's a bad PR offseason for the SEC.
I mean,
in a lot of
good
ways.
Lord. I mean, you have coaches taking shots at other coaches, coaches taking shots at schools, athletic directors talking some nonsense. And we're going to dive into all of that. But Brian, you and I were talking about this segment before the show started today, and it just kind of led me to just one question of like, what the heck happened to the SEC, dude?
Yeah.
Like, I remember when I was growing up, I'm obviously of the younger college football fan base members, but I remember growing up and just looking at, like, in 2009, for example, just thinking about the SEC and looking at the lineup of coaches. Think about Nick Saban at Bama, and Urban Meyer at Florida, Les Miles at LSU, Bobby Petrino at Arkansas, Mark Richt at Georgia, Lane Kiffin at Tennessee, Spurrier at South Carolina, Mullins at Mississippi State. Like, I'm going through and I'm like, man, that is just a conference that you don't want to mess with. That is a mean conference right there, dude. And now you fast forward to the 2026 offseason. It's like, this is just a conference full of a bunch of babies. Like, honestly, like, it's even the vets in the league. Like, Kirby Smart is still talking about, well, fine, you don't like it, we're just going to go and do our own thing then. It's like, what happened to the SEC conference that just for years were so dominant and didn't take it from anybody, and nor did they dish it back to each other? And now it's the polar 180. It's crazy, man.
What's funny about it is, well, I'll say, here's what I think is going on, Trev. I think what's happening is the bullies are now getting bullied, and they don't like it, and they don't know what to do about it. And so all they can do is really just complain. And the other part of it is, I think they know that when things are on more of an even playing field, like I think that it's harder for them to dominate. I think they're aware of the advantage. They're not stupid. They're aware of the advantages they had when they could pay players and nobody else could. They were aware of the advantage they could have when the transfer portal was such that they could just lie to kids, give a kid $50,000 to get him to go to their school, and then the kid was basically locked into being there unless they didn't want the kid anymore. I mean, they're not stupid. They know that. And so when that was shattered quickly, and this is why we said why we don't think the SEC is as good. It's not that there's some inherent rules now that makes the Big Ten better. It's that now when the playing field has been leveled, the SEC is now realizing they weren't the best coaches around. They had some of the best coaches, Nick Saban, Urban Meyer, but like other schools weren't dominating because they had better coaches than who was at Wisconsin. It's they had more money, and they were willing to do things at their schools that Barry Alvarez was not going to do at Wisconsin. And so when that got shattered, and all of a sudden Indiana can go out there and buy a roster just as easily as they can, their worlds got turned upside down, and they don't know what to do about it. And the bullies are now getting bullied, and they don't like it. And I think that's a big part of what's going on, Trev, because to your point, dude, I'm going through this right now, and I'm looking at like championships when you were a kid. And so you were born in 97, and you'd say, what was about 05 is about when you started. When would you say you kind of started having a remembrance of like, okay, I can remember something from college football? When was that? 05, 06?
I'd probably say 07 was like, I started watching Notre Dame in 05, but I wasn't aware of like the grand scheme of like college football until like 07, 08 is when I really started.
Okay. So let's go the year before that started, and let's look at the national champions in that stretch. So in 06, it's SEC, 2007 SEC, 2008 SEC, 2009 SEC, as far as where the national champion came from. 2010 SEC, 2011 SEC, 2012 SEC, 2013 ACC, 2014 Big Ten, 2015 SEC, 2016 ACC, 2007 SEC, 2018 ACC, 2019 SEC, 2020 SEC, 2021 SEC, 2022 SEC. And they haven't won one since. So in a 17-year stretch, the SEC won 13 of 17 national titles and never went more than 3 years without one. So like didn't win one in 13 or 14, but that third year they won one. and then won, then they won one, then didn't, then they won 4 straight. So like, 13 and 14, they didn't win either year, but they had a team in the championship game in 13. And then obviously their best team got beat in the semifinals in 2014. So I think part of it is, I don't think the SEC has they don't like the way the rules are, because what they're realizing is we don't have the money that Ohio State does. We don't have the money that Michigan does. From a donor standpoint, we don't have the money as a group that Notre Dame does. Georgia cannot get into it when it's all things are fair. Georgia can't get into a bidding war against Notre Dame if Notre Dame really wants a kid. Not maybe for a kid, but it's going to be a lot harder for them to put together a $40 million roster than it will be for Notre Dame or Georgia, for LSU or Texas or Ohio State or Oregon. It's harder. Where back then they could throw $50,000, $100,000. Their donors were throwing out, tens of thousands of dollars. Now their donors are like, oh, now your donors are having to compete with. Somebody just said this: car dealers don't pay that much. That's absolutely right. With all due respect, your local car dealer who's a big Bama fan can't compete with Notre Dame's Fortune 500 CEO that wants their football team to be really good. Or like John Ruiz at Miami, or Dave Portnoy at Michigan. You don't have as many as some do. Texas does. LSU does. But can LSU do that annually? That's a legit question. I don't know that any of these teams can do this annually for the next 10 years. I don't know that Notre Dame can do what they're doing right now for 10 years. I don't know that Texas can do that. I don't know that Texas Tech can do that. Maybe. We don't know because we haven't been there. I think that's what's going on is you were sitting in an area where a big chunk of the best players were in your backyard. And the fact that, Notre Dame offers an education and all this, but not only is Georgia closer to home, but they're willing to give me $50,000 to stay close to home that I can then use to help my mom get out. So that's kind of my thing is like, now 50,000, bro, let me introduce you to so-and-so donor at Notre Dame. Let me introduce you to such and such company at Notre Dame. And now Notre Dame can offer that kind of money. Where now, even if Georgia offers a kid more, unless it's crazy more, what do you have to offer that Notre Dame doesn't have better or equal to? Because, I'm going to go to Notre Dame where they have a 97% graduation rate, still make $300,000, do this, do that. Or I take an extra $100,000 to come to your school where your team has had more kids arrested than you've had wins in 24 and 25, and where your graduation rate is sub 50%. Like, you see what I'm saying, Trev? Like, and I can take care of my mom with that $300,000. Yeah, I could maybe take care of her more, $400,000, but my mom understands that $300,000 plus the Notre Dame degree is in 20 years is going to be worth a lot more than $400,000 and a $500,000 in a Georgia degree, unless I want to work in the state of Georgia. That's not true for every kid. What I'm saying is that is making an impact with enough kids that they're able to do that. And it's harder for the SEC to go up north and poach kids now because Indiana can say, you don't need to do that. Here, we'll give you this. And that's the right. Because what I remember being told this by I can't remember who it was. I remember who it was. Can't say who it was. But somebody was deep into the recruiting business when I first got into this. And I remember Brian Smith and I having this conversation. And it said, look, there's 3 schools that just flat out don't cheat when it comes to paying players, like at all. And it was like Notre Dame, Penn State, and Michigan. Now, I'm sure there were others that weren't doing that. But even in that conversation, you're like, yeah, there's some things Ohio State does. But Ohio State does things with their current players. They take care of their current players. They're not out there throwing $100,000 bags to some kid to get him to go there the way it was happening in the SEC and the Southwest Conference and the Big 8. It only became an SEC problem when they kept gobbling up those conferences. But it was the Southwest. The Southwest Conference was the dirtiest conference out there. Now a lot of those teams are now in the SEC, but they were the dirty conference. So you're looking at it, Trev, and you're saying the things that worked for you. And then when the portal was not a thing, if you got that 5-star kid to commit and he was sitting on the bench for 2 years, he was just going to sit on the bench. He was going to sit out a year as much as you're going to see now, where it's like, screw this. I'm going to go play at some other school. I'm going to go Kentucky and be a dude. or I'm going to go up to Indiana and be a dude. And as those things have happened, and the SEC is now it comes down to, you do got to coach better now. You do got to develop better now. You do need to make sure that these kids understand how important it is to go to class. Why do you think Clark Lee is having more success recruiting? Vanderbilt has some money. They're willing to spend it. And so now it's like, well, I can go to Vanderbilt, still play in the SEC, get a good degree. Pre-NIL, there's no way Jared Curtis goes to Vanderbilt. No way. Now, because that's a school that's got some good money donors, they can now go get that kid. And so it's still SEC, but the point is the monopoly isn't in 3 or 4 teams anymore like it was. And they just can't spend with certain teams. They can't spend with Texas. You should have thought about that before you brought them into your league. But, another story. So instead of, hey, we got to get better, because that's what the Big Ten did. Hey, we got to get better. We got to get better athletes. We got to get better coaches. We got to do better this. We got to invest more money in this. If we want to compete with the SEC, we've got to do this. And so you saw teams adding better coaches as we go through it. Just, who are you going to take, Brett Bielema or Shane Beamer? Well, we saw that play out 2 years ago when a much more talented South Carolina roster, who did not have a bunch of guys sitting out, by the way, because all their guys were coming back, get outclassed from a coaching standpoint by an inferior roster at Illinois. Because the gap is closed enough talent-wise because of these other aspects that they can now say, hey, look, our coaching advantages are now going to win out over you. Indiana was not 35 points better than Bama from a talent standpoint. They were 35 points better than Alabama from a coaching standpoint because the roster was now talented enough that coaching is the difference maker. That's what's happening right now. Kirby Smart doesn't look like the same coaching genius that he did before, except what? Against other SEC teams. Looks like a genius. But then his teams barely can beat Brent Key. I mean, think about that. Last 2 years, they barely beat Georgia Tech the last 2 years and got smacked by Notre Dame in the playoff. Their track record outside the league since NIL and the portal has not been great. And that's true for the league as a whole, because you just can't put a way more talented team on the league. That's partly why Nick Saban dominated the way that he did, because Alabama was the exception. They were not only incredibly talented, they were also incredibly well coached. That's why they dominated that league. It's a big reason why. Now, you're not able to dominate teams roster-wise. We did a breakdown the other day, Trevor, or a couple weeks ago, where we talked about the top 10 rosters in college football. I think our top 5 was Notre Dame, Ohio State, in not particular order, Texas, Oregon, and I think Miami. I think it was my 5. How many SEC teams are in there? 1. And it's a team that's been in the SEC for 5 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, Georgia was down, Oklahoma was down, Bama was down, because they just can't go out there and build the rosters the way they could, and to where the fact that they can't coach their way out of what paper bag some of those coaches didn't matter, because they were so much more talented. Hugh Freeze looked like a way better coach when he could just buy rosters and play teams that couldn't buy rosters. Now, all of a sudden, it's about how well you coach, because Indiana can keep those players. You just can't come up and get Laquan Treadwell and pay him $200,000 to come down there anymore. Because now that kid's going to get, okay, Illinois will pay that kid the same amount of money. So I think those things have happened, and instead of saying, hey, let's get better, as much as I dislike the Big Ten, that's what their focus is on. Let's bring in good coaches. Let's make sure our donors understand they got to pony up if they want us to be good at football. And we've got big donors, because there's a lot of good research schools up in the Big Ten. I think where Notre Dame doesn't fit in the Big Ten is Notre Dame's a private school, and most of the Big Ten are public schools. I mean, Northwestern, and there are some, but it's a different type of institution, where the ACC has schools that are more like Notre Dame in that regard. So I think that's some of the attractions for Notre Dame. But you're realizing, like, Ohio State's, they got money, because Ohio cares as much about football as the state of Alabama does, and we're a bigger state. Like, Ohio State is one of the few Big Ten teams that can put 100,000 people in the stands like SEC teams do. Penn State can as well. That's why Penn State never had a problem, because Penn State is the modern SEC when they had Franklin. They were what the SEC was for a long time. They were going to win a bunch of games because they had a way better roster. But whenever they played somebody that had equal talent, they were going to lose because their coach couldn't coach. That's what the SEC used to be. The problem is the only teams that had comparable rosters were in the SEC. You know what I mean? And so the game has changed, and they haven't responded well to it as a whole. They make a lot of excuses. They want to go back to the way that it was, or we're going to take our ball and go home, which is what Kirby said, which is an ignorant comment. We'll play by our own rules. You guys are, what they don't realize is you're admitting that you guys were basically playing by your own rules. And now that the rules are kind of the same for everybody, and now it's about who implements those rules the best, who coaches the best, you're upset and you want to go take your ball and go home. That's basically what's going on. So that's what happened to the SEC, Trev, is the playing field was leveled to a degree in an unhealthy way. You and I would agree it's an unhealthy way, the way that the game has been leveled. But the idea of the level playing field is why. I mean, the SEC did not dominate the sport until TV money dominated the sport. Think about that. They had great teams, but they never dominated the way they are now. Now, there's more reasons for it. Back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, there were a lot more elite players in Ohio and Pennsylvania and Illinois than there are now because of, we've talked about this, population changes and things like that. I mean, Texas is a bigger state now. Florida's a much bigger state now. Georgia's a bigger state now, things along those lines. But, I mean, Louisiana's still not a very big state. Alabama's still not a very big state. Their per capita, how many kids they put in the NFL is big time. But the point is, a state like Ohio and Pennsylvania, those are still much bigger states from a population standpoint than those other states. But in Pennsylvania, in Alabama, it's just Alabama. In Pennsylvania, you've got the Steelers, you've got the Penguins, you've got the Flyers, you've got the Sixers, you've got the Eagles, you've got the Pirates, you've got the Phillies, and you've got Penn State, and you've got Pitt, and where in Alabama, what is there in Alabama? It's Alabama football, Auburn football, kind of. What do you have in Mississippi? It's Ole Miss. It's Mississippi State. That's it. Even in a state like Georgia, they've got the Atlanta teams. But that's it. So there's a lot of things about that, Trev, that I think have played into why the Big Ten has been able to do what they've done, why Notre Dame is doing what they're doing in an era where it's more about how much money you can raise legally. And you and I said this, and when this whole thing started, and I know maybe it was me and Ryan. I can't remember if you were on the it's like now I've had shows where I have interjected you into the show. Like, I think you were on that show. You're like, dude, that was 2022. I didn't work for you then. But we said, look, this is going to benefit Notre Dame. I don't like NIL. I don't like but this will benefit Notre Dame. Because now that Notre Dame can pay kids, you're going to see them recruit better. And they are. And Ohio State is. And, Oregon is. And so now the Big Ten can throw their weight around and they're more successful as an entity. In Indiana, doesn't happen under the old system. Now, I don't like the system the way that it is. And I don't think if the system was done right, I still think a team like Indiana can have success. Because here's the deal. All the kids that Curt Cignetti brought with him to build the team from the last 2 years, very, very, very few, if any, were second transfers. Can you think? I mean, Fernando Mendoza played at one school before he transferred to Indiana. All the JMU kids, I think Elijah Surratt might have played at like a D2 school for a year.
I can't remember if he was at a D2 school or JUCO, but
might have been JUCO. He might be. The rest, so this. Well, you won't have an Indiana under these rules. Yeah, you will if they hire Curt Cignetti. What did Indiana do, Trev, the last 2 years that to win that they won't be able to do in this new system?
Nothing.
There you go. But that's why I don't think the SEC will support this new system. They want as much as they can to go back to the old system.
No.
To where now giving a kid $100,000 under the table is going to have a lot more impact than it did before.
Agreed. And let's be real about something too. They're going to continue to do it. Like if this bill, the Protect College Sports Act, does come to fruition and they basically say no to NIL collectives, I could very well see SEC coaches and schools just going back to doing what they did in 2009. Like I'm also not naive to that fact either. Unfortunately, just playing fields will still continue to be leveled. But within that, Brian, there has been a lot of talk from SEC coaches this offseason. Steve Sarkisian being one in particular, and despite them being one of the favorites on FanDuel to win the national title, but aside from us thinking that they have one of the best returning rosters in college football, Texas, especially lately, and when I mean lately, I mean the last couple of days, has been a program that has done a good amount of whining the last couple of days. And it's,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It is, it just ties into the things we were talking about, Trev, where they're just, it's just a bad look. Some of the stuff they're doing. We've talked about it before, but like these coaches sniping at each other. It's just a childish look. These SEC schools getting out of tough non-conference games, like it's a bad look the way that they're doing it. The complaining about, oh well, why should we play Ohio State when that's going to cost us a playoff spot? When anyone with a brain knows that did not cost you a playoff spot. Losing to 4-8 Florida cost you a playoff spot. Getting beat by 25 by Georgia cost you a playoff spot. Like, you could have lost to Ohio State by 30. And if you would have beat Florida, who would have finished 3-9 had you beat them, you're in the playoffs. Well, you can't get blown out in a non-conference game and make the playoffs. Kalen DeBoer's on the phone. He would like a word with you. Because they got their butts kicked by a 5-7 non-conference team. And they still got in as a 9 seed. Like, they weren't even close to not getting in. Notre Dame could have beat Stanford by a hundo, and they wouldn't have passed Alabama, who lost to an ACC team who had a losing record. Looked like world beaters when they were playing SEC and other non-conference teams, and they get into the league play, and all of a sudden they suck. So it's just such a whiny look. And he's like, oh, I'd rather go back to 4. Well, of course you go back to 4 because your proposal for getting to 4 guarantees that you're going to have at least 1, if not 2 SEC teams in it every year. And then now there's more games you have to lose. Where it's like in those years where you had 2 SEC teams, you only had to really win 2 games to guarantee that you were going to have an SEC champion. Where now you have to have just one team has to win 3 to win it all. And now that you've got to play more teams, you're getting beat. Because he said, other than the year Georgia didn't get in, we've always had the right 4 teams. No, we haven't. I promise you 2015 Ohio State would have done some damage if they'd have got into the college football playoffs in a 12-team playoff. I think Ohio State wins a title in 15 if they make if there's a playoff. Because they'd have been so pissed off from that. I mean, look what they did to Notre Dame. They were pissed in that game because they thought they should have been playing in the playoffs, and they felt they got screwed because they had that bad loss to Michigan State by a point. So we should have been in. Instead, Michigan State gets in and gets annihilated by Alabama, a team that Ohio State whooped the year before in the playoffs on their way to a championship. Like 15 Alabama, in my opinion, Trev, with Jacob Coker at quarterback, does not beat 2015 Ohio State with Joey Bosa, Ezekiel Elliott, Michael Thomas, Jeff. I mean, think about the secondary they had. Von Bell. I mean, didn't 3 of their 4 starting DBs that year, weren't they first-round picks? And I think Von Bell was the only one who wasn't. Who was a second-round pick. Like, it was insane. Jerry Conley was a first-round pick. Like, that team does damage. And I do not buy that you had the right 4 that year if we're using the logic the SEC often employs about who should or shouldn't get in. I don't think we always had the right 4. I don't think Ohio State should have been in over TCU in 2014. I've made that case. And just because Ohio State won it all doesn't mean that they should have been in. That TCU team could have done some damage if they were in the playoffs in 2014. Art Briles had a couple teams that might have been able to knock off a team or 2 if they would have been in a 12-team playoff. And so the fewer teams in, they know there's always going to be a heavy SEC influence in there, then the fewer games you have to win. That's why he wants a shorter playoff. because he knows we're going to get in a lot of those, and it's a lot easier to win those things. So that's the reality of it. So this notion that, well, we didn't play we didn't get in because we lost Ohio State, then that's a weak argument. Now, here's an argument that I would say, if you want to say something and make a case that doesn't make you sound like whiny little you-know-whats, here's your case. Why should we schedule Florida State and Notre Dame and such and such and such and such when Indiana plays this in the non-conference? When Michigan played this in the non-conference? When Penn State plays this in the non-conference? Like, we're just following the Big Ten's lead. The Big Ten is the one that said, hey, USC's dropping people. They dropped Ole Miss. They dropped Notre Dame. Like, what's our reasoning for playing these tough non-conference games, and especially for teams like Georgia and Florida, who already have Power 4 teams, and South Carolina, who already have Power 4 teams built into their schedule for rivalry week? What's the incentive for Georgia to play a team like that? Texas is a little bit different because they don't have that same thing in, but I'm sympathetic to South Carolina's early non-conference not being tough, or Georgia's not being tough, based on the way that the Big Ten is doing things. That's the thing, Trev, is your messaging sucks. If you want to make softer schedules and say, hey, why should we play Notre Dame in the non-conference, which could hurt us because Indiana's going to go out there and go 11-1, play nobody in the non-conference, play only like one or two maybe tough games. They only got to go 1-1 against that tough schedule, and they're in, where we might go 9-3 because we get beat by Ohio State. And then because this is a valid argument, is don't pretend like the Ohio State game knocked you out. Say, hey, listen, last 2 years, a team like Florida has gone off and knocked off a team, knocked us out this year, knocked Bama out last year, or knocked Ole Miss out last year. You've got teams like Vandy, knocked Bama out last year at 7-6. Name me the 4-8 Big Ten team that's knocking off one of the top Big Ten teams. Like, that's a good argument to make. To say, well, our conference is deep. No, make the specific case. Hey, it's tough enough to run the table in our league because the 8th best team in our league is this team, and the 8th best team in that league is freaking Minnesota. Like make that case and point out the Big Ten. Go to war with the Big Ten. This is what I don't understand. You just come across as whiny little right now, as opposed to saying, hey, listen, the last 3 Big Ten champions, they played 9 conference games and they played 0. And I think Andrew Gilmore pointed this out. They played 0 Power 4 opponents in the non-conference. 0. We're just following their suit. They're getting teams with terrible strength of schedule into the playoffs because they're just piling up wins against soft in-conference schedules and soft non-conference schedules. The best teams don't have to go through a gauntlet like we do, where Georgia's got to play Texas and Alabama. And I mean, list all the teams at Georgia, Ole Miss and Tennessee and all these good teams, where the top teams in the Big Ten get, hey, you just got to go 1-1 against these 2 good teams you're going to play and you're going to get in. That's a valid argument to make, where they can make it in a way that doesn't come across as whiny as they're making it now. That's my issue. It's like, I actually think there's merit to what they're trying to say. They just suck at saying it, and it sounds super whiny. Like Greg Sankey, we're better because we're deeper. Shut your pie hole. Because you made the case for a decade that you were the best conference because look how many championships we won. You're the one that started this argument of the best team is the team that wins all the championships. So you don't then go flip the script now and say, well, yeah, we're not winning championships and haven't even played for a championship since 2022, but we're really good at number 8. Our number 8 can kick your number 8's butt. Yeah, okay. But their number 1, 2, and 3 are kicking your number 1, 2, and 3's butt, which is what you guys used to always say mattered. So that's my problem, is I actually want to support the SEC right now, because I think they're on the side in the playoff expansion conversation, and we don't know where they're going to stand on. We think we know they're going to stand on this act, this bill. We don't know, so we'll address that when they start speaking on it. But right now, it's a lot about this playoff push. I'm on their side, but they suck at PR. The arguments they're making are terrible. And here's the final piece too, Trevor. The Big Ten is super unified right now. They're stating their objections in the conference, in their meetings, and then once they get out of the meetings, okay, we're putting on a unified front. We're all on the same page. I promise you that not all 18 teams were going into that meeting. Oh, yeah, 24. But, okay, coming out of it, hey, this is what our conference is going to push for, and so we're all going to have their back. But then you're in the SEC meetings, and you've got them taking shots at each other, and every coach wants to be on Twitter getting quoted, and you got Danny White saying we support 24-team playoff. Mike Elko says we support a 40-team playoff, and he was kind of being a little tongue-in-cheek on that. I don't think he was making a real argument for 40, Trev, and you can speak more on that because there was something else he said that I think makes us believe that he wasn't being genuine. He was kind of making a point. But you've got different coaches coming. I mean, there's what's the SEC stance? We know what the Big Ten stance is because they're all on the same page publicly. But with the SEC, it's like you got this Steve Sarkisian's going for 4. Danny White wants 24. Mike Elko wants 40. Wink, wink. What do you guys want? And that's the issue that
Kirby Smart just wants to leave the whole thing and just go do his own thing.
Right.
To your point, there's no unified front. Mike Elko, I do think that it was purely sarcastic.
Right.
There was no video, I think, that got released with it. It was just his quote. He's like, what would be ideal for Mike Elko? 40 teams, because then I would always have a job. And then he went on to say, making a playoff should be difficult. Mm-hmm. Like it should be earned. And that's something that I fully back. But to your point, it's just there's no unified front. Because I guarantee publicly, if you ask anyone from Ryan Day and Dan Lanning and Kurt Cignetti at the top, all the way down to, I don't even know who Rutgers head coach's name is, or down to Chip Kelly, who just took over Northwestern. Thank you. I was going to say some name that was wrong. And I was like, I knew his first name was Greg, did not know his last name. But
there is video, by the way, of Elko saying that, and it's very clear, in my opinion, that he's making a point.
Yeah.
That's why I said wink, wink. He's not advocating for 40. I actually think it was kind of a shot at I actually kind of took it a little bit as a shot at the Big Ten.
Yeah.
As if like, getting 24 teams in means you're not going to get fired.
Yeah.
That's how I kind of took it. But the point is he's saying one thing and you've got somebody else saying another thing, and that was my pick.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guarantee if you go and ask the tippy top of Ryan Day, Dan Lanning, and Kurt Cignetti down to Greg Schiano and Chip Kelly, who just took over at Northwestern, they'd be like, yeah, we'd be down for 24 teams. They'd probably put in a little bit of, I don't know if it's necessary, but this is how, this is what we would want.
I'm going to say something, Trev, that I think you're going to like, because we're both kind of nerdy when it comes to the superhero genre and stuff like that. If the lasso of truth was a real thing, I promise you that you do not have the same answers from all 18 ADs and all 18 head coaches. I promise you that would be the case. But they're smart in that handle your business here. Let's get it all out here. State your case here. But when we leave this room, we're all on the same page. And here's why. But in the SEC, it's like everybody's got their own agendas. And Sankey needs to figure some stuff out real quick. Because if they're unified for 24 and you're all over the place, eventually you're going to have to give in because your own schools are undermining you. The other thing that bothers me too, Trev, is you've got Kirby Smart talking about we're going to go do our own thing and all this other kind of stuff. And they're because if there's not going to be any rules, and hey, bruh, I hate to break it to you, but a big part of the reason there are no rules is because your league keeps suing the NCAA every time you don't get your way. You guys say you want rules. They make rules. Tennessee violates those rules. The NCAA tries to punish Tennessee, and Tennessee sues and wins. That's why we don't have any rules right now. It's because of your league. Like, what are you doing here? It's stupidity. It's absolute stupidity. That's the part that really gets me. This threatening to go join another league and and we're gonna because there's just the no rules, the wild west. You guys invented the wild west in college sports, and when the NCAA tried to rein it in, you idiots are the ones that kept suing them. Your state legislature was the one that kept passing these dumb NIL laws that circumvented the rules that the NCAA was trying to put in place. And then now you want to cry, the rules are too hard. There's no rules. It's too hard. It's not fair. You guys are the reason we're here. So you don't think I'm going to go cry about a broken system when you freaking broke it. It's just, dude, this is why the problem that we have here is it's same in politics as in sports with Hollywood. Whenever you have people in power, they tend to be surrounded by people that are just going to tell them what they want to hear. And they kind of spend time in these like little echo chambers of Georgia rah-rah fans or Alabama rah-rah fans that tell them, oh, no, this is everything's wonderful. And I don't think they have any concept of how they're viewed on the bigger stage. The reality is that doesn't matter when in a lot of ways, recruiting and whatever. But when you're trying to get the game to change and you're a very small part of that game, less than 20%, certainly. What, 118 or 16 out of 138? You're a very small portion of the population of college sports. And yes, you wield a big stick, but there's another team that wields a big stick right now also, or program or conference in the Big Ten. They want something dramatically different than what you want. So if you want to accomplish what you want to accomplish, then you need to have a unified front, but you also need to stop saying really dumb things that it's like, I'm so close to having the SEC's back, and then we get to SEC media days, and they're just all saying like the most moronic, self-sabotaging, childish, just, dude, you know that I have Google, right? Like, you know how easy it is for us to prove that what you're saying now that you want now, the NCAA tried to do, but you guys are the ones that prevented it, either by suing or by getting your state legislatures to pass laws undermining NCAA rules, knowing the NCAA had no recourse to overcome that. And now you want to cry, it's unfair. I mean, it's kind of pisses me off. And then it's like, okay, I'm out. I can't support them. I can't. And you're going to lose this battle because of the fact that you guys are saying dumb things. You're making terrible arguments and you're not unified.
At the bare minimum, just stop taking shots at each other. Like, that's at the bare minimum. Like, we can talk about not being a unified front against the Big Ten, and we talk about how the SEC is doing a bad job of just randomly taking a shot at like Steve Sarkisian, talking about how like Notre Dame gets their own free spot, whatever. That's a different story for a different day. He's probably just sore at his own personal record against Notre Dame. Another conversation for a different day. But look, fact of the matter is, at the bare minimum, if publicly you are not going to be a unified front against a 24-team college playoff, at least be a unified front in that we are all the SEC. It is hard for me to believe that you all individually think that you're the toughest conference to play in when you're constantly taking shots at other teams in the SEC and talking about how bad they are.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I like in the same conversation, you can't be like, yeah, Ole Miss is dumb and racist, but we're also the hardest conference to play in. It's like,
yeah.
That's hard for me to buy into anything.
You know, that school that I was at the last 6 years, they're pretty racist there, but I stayed there for 6 years just because, I mean, oh, this school is basket weaving. They're going to take basket weaving over there. It's like, you're kind of playing in the stereotype that everyone has about your stupid league.
That's what I'm saying.
It's like, dude, he has embarrassed himself this offseason. And look, Trev, I've been a big defender of Sark a lot over the years. I'm out. I mean, I'm still going to be fair to your team. They have a loaded roster, very talented team. But him personally, it's like, dude, go win a big game, please. You know what I mean? Like, can you please do that? Like, can you try and, like, I don't know, be competitive against Georgia? Like, more than once every 3 games. I mean, it's just it's like what. It's just silly. I get why Sark doesn't like Pete Golding. he has a very valid reason to not like Pete Golding. But handle it like a man. Not this silly thing where it's like, dude, that actually doesn't help you. Because we're trying to accomplish something here. You want 4, then, and these coaches are so dumb. Do you really think that schools that are going to – Dan Mullen led Florida to back-to-back New Year's Six games. Then his third year played Bama down to the wire in the SEC title game and got fired the next year. James Franklin led Penn State to a national semifinals and got fired halfway through the next year. Do you think making the playoff at Texas A&M as the number 23 seed every year is going to save your job? Hey, the interim coach can get beat just as badly in the first round as you can. You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to help. That's why I'm so pissed that Pete Bavacqua made that weak argument. Come on, dude. You're telling me you're going to keep your coach if he's had 3 straight years of being in the 20s? Hey, man, he's in the playoffs every year. No, you're not. So don't make this weak argument. That's what, like, whoever you're paying for PR, fire them. Because literally you have no PR team right now. Just, you got coaches saying the dumbest stuff ever. You have no leadership right now whatsoever in the SEC. Greg Sankey he's Arnold Schwarzenegger in Kindergarten Cop right now. Like, that's who he is. Like, that's what Greg Sankey is right now. He just can't rein it in because these guys just don't. And then you got Pete Golding, who I cannot stand. And sorry, Ole Miss, I would love to see them go 0-12 this year and Trinidad Chambliss throw for 400 yards in every game. That's what I want to happen. He dominates, but they lose every game. I can't stand Ole Miss. Oh, yeah? You want to come at me? I'll burn the whole system down. Do it. Do it. Narc on everybody else. Because you know who he's going to be narking on? Most of the people he's going to narc on are teams in his league, which he kind of hinted about when he starts talking about TJ Dockery going to LSU. Like, you just threatened to take down a team in your own freaking league, you moron. Like, you do not see that in the Big Ten. Not publicly. That's why they're failing, Trev. As whiny as the ACC coaches were, they were all whiny about the same thing. You know what I mean? Like, they were all crying about Notre Dame and want to expand the playoffs.
They were.
But at least consistency in their crying. Yeah. You guys aren't even making the same – you're not even crying about the same things. You're going at each other. You didn't have Pat Narduzzi taking shots at Dabo or Mike Norvell. He's taking shots at Notre Dame.
Yeah. Lesson of the day, ladies and gentlemen. If you're going to be criers, be unified criers. Don't just be
and not about each other. You know, it's just like, what are you doing? This is why the Big Ten is dominating you. They have more grown-ups in the room. Even though I don't agree with what they're fighting for, there's more grown-ups in the room in the Big Ten right now than there is in the SEC. And that's why the SEC is right now getting dominated on and off the field.
Yeah.
That's what's going on. And I hope they get their act together because this is a very important time for the SEC to wield some power and do what's right for themselves, number one, and then also for the game. And they're not going to accomplish it because they're just a bunch of crybabies. And there's enough self-absorbed teams in that league to say, well, yeah, I know this is what the league wants, but we can't make the playoffs without it. And so we want it. Yeah. Daily comments in the chat makes a great point, and I actually don't like it, but he's right. Duke didn't cry as much about Miami taking Darian Mensah and Cooper Barcati illegally as what you're seeing from these SEC schools about things with each other.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, because Duke now listen, Duke was pissed about it, but Duke complained about it through the proper channels to say, hey, this isn't right. And there's nothing that the ACC could do. Like, dude, we could try and stop it. Then Miami's going to sue us. And then, you know, now we're back to this thing where we can't fight the teams in our league and we're kind of handicapped because these teams all want to leave anyway. But they did it through back channels.
Yep. I mean,
and then even Dabo tried to handle business the right way, but Ole Miss wasn't listening. So Dabo's like, all right, cool. We're going to go public with it then.
Yep.
But Dabo was taking a shot at another conference. Now, I only want to go so far and my public support of the ACC, because that's also a league that had 2 prominent schools sue the league to get out. So, I mean, I'm just saying when it comes to the coaches in this instance, at least their crybaby antics were all towards outward entities, not taking shots at each other like school children.
Yeah, it's such a mess. I mean, it really is. And one that, if Notre Dame fans needed any more reinforcement in the ideology to be independent, just go look at, you want to go join that mess in the SEC? Like, you want to go be a part of that? No, dude. Just a bunch of criers. Just a bunch of criers. That's all they are.
And Chris Conte obviously comes out with the, Notre Dame's tentatively on the schedule. Now, here's something that I talk about, Trevor, where you have a golden opportunity, but your coaches aren't smart enough to discuss it, and your ADs aren't smart enough to discuss it. So allegedly, I think it's Greg Sankey said this, it wasn't Greg Sankey. It was some ADs and coaches, I guess, behind the scenes off the record said they're ticked at the Big Ten right now because allegedly the Big Ten told them, if you go to 9 games, we'll agree to a 16-team playoff. Because remember, the Big Ten was talking 24, but they said, if you guys go to 9 conference games, we'll agree to a 16-team playoff, which is what the SEC wants. But then the SEC did that, and the SEC made their 9-game schedule even harder because they also mandated that they play 1 Power 4 non-conference, which the Big Ten did not do. And then the Big Ten still said, just kidding. We're only going to play, we still want 24. So you could crush the Big Ten right now in a PR battle if you guys weren't a bunch of children. And somebody said Eli Drinkwitz said that. Well, you know why we're not talking about Eli Drinkwitz saying that? Because we're talking about Steve Sarkisian's dumb comments, Pete Golding's dumb comments, Kirby Smart's dumb comments. So if there is a coach making a valid argument to push back on the Big Ten, it's being drowned out by these other crybabies who are taking shots at each other or, giving conflicting remarks and all this other kind of stuff. Instead of a unified front, hey guys, we're all pissed about this. Then let's use that. And if you got beef with him, then we'll handle that stuff right now. Let's get together. It's me, you, and 2 guys. We're going to go in this back room. And if things got to happen, some things got to happen. Just no hits to the face. You know what I mean? Like, what was it from Anchorman? Here's on the roll. Was it like, what did he say?
No touching of the face or hair
and face.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like, okay, cool. Dude's got some bruised ribs, but nobody saw it. You handled your business. I mean, I'm not advocating fight. I'm just making the point, like, handle that stuff behind closed doors. But when you go outside, we're unified. This is the messaging. Big Ten lied to us. They're trying to manipulate the process because they're trying to use their little small, brief window of success to try to bully the sport in a way that we're not going to go with you on, because our time will come back around, which it will if they handle things the right way. We talked about this year. There's a lot more SEC teams that have championship caliber rosters this year than there were the last 2 years. I won't be shocked if the SEC wins a title this year, or at least has a team in the championship. Last year, I would have been surprised. The year before that, I'd have been a little surprised. This year, I won't be as surprised. I mean, I don't think they have the best team, but if Texas wins it all, we're not going to be like, wow, I didn't see that coming. So that's my issue, Trevor, is if you guys would present a unified front, make actually sound arguments based on reality and logic, and I don't know why you're taking shots at Notre Dame, Sark. Guaranteed spot. Like, what are you talking about, dude? I mean, with all due respect, Notre Dame's been in more 14 playoffs than you have. You've been in 1. You were coaching the entire time. Oh, I mean, if you had to write Nick Saban's coattails to a couple of them, but as a head coach. So it's frustrating because they have great arguments to make, but they're too childish and too in their own, I'm the man and I'm going to say what I want to say, to do what they need to do as a conference to push back against a very unified, very tight, to the point Big Ten, who has a losing argument, but they're winning because their messaging is consistent and narrow. And that's why right now the Big Ten is dominating the SEC, despite the fact the Big Ten, I'm talking about in the battle to push to the 24, despite the fact what they want is very unpopular with college football fans, including their own fans. But because there's the other heavyweight is got the mental capacity of a 12-year-old right now, they're winning. They got to get their heads out of their you-know-whats and figure this stuff out. Greg Sankey needs to have a come-to-Jesus conversation with the ADs and the coaches at those schools, or they're going to lose this battle.
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
Trev, before we get out of here, we did have just a couple questions here that we'll get to. We're not going to do a full mailbag because we didn't really get any mailbag questions, but daily comments, our resident Miami fan says, what do you think about doing with spring ball and going towards a spring OTA like the NFL with the goal to help with calendar craziness? I don't know that spring ball necessarily is the reason for calendar craziness. The calendar craziness is more about when does the semester start? And it's not a lot you can do about that. I don't think once you start having spring ball in March and April, I don't think that necessarily impacts the calendar a whole lot. I also kind of like the idea of the way it's set up now, because again, it's not the NFL. They have class, they have other things to do. I like the idea of having a period that's less intense every other day in the middle of the school year type of thing. Then you can take a break. Then you have summer workouts, and then you take another quick 2-week break, and then you get back to fall camp. I think that actually makes a lot of sense. Also, let's not also forget that there's a lot of rookie camps and different things happening during spring ball right after the draft. So, you're seeing, within a week of being drafted, Jadarian Price is in a Seahawks uniform at practice, rookie camp. Jake Tefelsky signed a contract, and within a week, he not signed a contract. He got an invite to attend it, and within a week, he's there working out, trying to make a team. So, they have different periods as well. So, if you want to add a summer OTA, which honestly they already have. They have summer workouts, and you're allowed to do now football stuff in those summer workouts. So they do have kind of a summer OTA. You just would need to officially call it that. But I like the idea of both. I like the spring period, the way it's set up, spread out, not as much wear and tear. And then I like the fact they have summer workouts that are more about conditioning and teaching and things like that. And then you get in the fall. So I actually think that part of the calendar is fine. The calendar issues they have more to do with the fact that the season ends too late. So fix that as opposed to trying to push back spring ball.
Yeah, I'm under the same belief. It's just because the national title game this year ends, or really happens on January 25th doesn't mean do away with spring ball. That just means fix, I guess, what would technically be the back end of this current calendar, then adjust the following year's current calendar. I'm with you. But as far as summer OTAs go, that's basically what they do right now.
Right.
They have
start doing that
OTAs
next week. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's good that it's set up this way because it's built around school.
That's
why so many Notre Dame kids are graduating in 3 years, because they're going to summer school. They're taking legit, summer school classes, and it's helping them to, you take that for 3 years. That's a whole semester, if not, more. So you take 2 summer school classes every year. That's a semester.
Yeah.
And if you early enrollee and then do that, that's how you graduate in 3 years.
Yep. 100%.
Thank you for that, Chris. He says, great show with his super chat. Appreciate you very, very much. Couple of questions in response to what we were discussing about here. We got one from Melvin.
Brian, speaking of the SEC having a bad offseason, what is going on with Steve Sarkisian? I think he's a good coach and he's won at Texas, but I feel like he'd be better if he had just stopped talking.
Agree with you. I don't know what his deal is. I don't remember him being this talkative last year. Maybe he was, and I just didn't pay attention, but he just keeps saying dumb things. And he did walk back the basket weaving thing because I think somebody talked to him about it. But then he goes, I'd like for 4. And then, but if we're not going to do 4, then we should go to here. And it's just like, dude, do you even know what you're saying?
No.
It's like that scene from National Security. Do you even believe the things you? He goes, I don't know. I don't really know what I be saying until I be done saying it. That's Steve Sarkisian right now. I don't really know what I'm saying until I'm done saying it. I'm like, I probably shouldn't have said that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't, buddy. I don't have a clue what's going on with him right now.
From DJ, do you think the bill should have reached to high school level as it pertains to agents and NIL?
I think it kind of does, because the whole point of an agent is to negotiate NIL deals, but yes, with the goal of going to college. I mean, technically, I can negotiate a deal with the kid for a deal that he's a senior in high school. I mean, I'll have to read through it again, DJ, but I kind of felt like some of the language did lead to that. You can't be, I mean, because if you do negotiate that one deal in high school, the reality is you're gonna not be that guy's agent because you can't do anything until you've registered and gone through that whole process. I think the other thing too is where this makes a lot of sense is if an agent, let's say an agent who's not registered tries to get a high school kid, then they're going to be able to have access to say, well, that guy's not a registered agent. We're not going to go with him. And if that guy is then doing things for the high school kid and not working with colleges, that's a real quick way to find yourself decertified, which goes back to the original thing. So I think I wouldn't mind it. I mean, better safe than sorry, but I think it kind of does that. And I'm going to have to read through the language again, Trev, to see if there's anything specific in there. But I just think there's enough in here where it's going to be real hard and it would be real unwise for an agent to try to do something like that. And the reality is most NIL deals that are going to really make you any real money are going to be more associated with the kid going to college, not this high school junior. I mean, like a Jimmy Clausen might have been able to get some great deals just as a high school recruit. But those guys don't come along very often where they're considered like the LeBron James of high school football type of thing. You just don't see that quite as much. So I don't know that it makes a lot of sense, but I wouldn't be opposed to it if it extended. Like any interaction you have, but this is where I also think the protection of the retroactive lawsuits can come into play. Like, hold on a second. Like this guy did this. I can now that I'm in the NCAA, I can go back and sue this guy because he charged me 30% or 20% or whatever.
I think naturally by how the bill is structured, it will leak down into the high school level because if the bill stays true and like the CSC does what they're supposed to and basically screen any NIL venture that's not like a business related, like I think that would just kind of sort itself out, in my opinion. Like Nico, for example, when he went to Tennessee, like when he was in high school, he signed like a 3-year, $8 million NIL contract with Tennessee. What business venture are you getting into with a 17-year-old? There's no local car dealership that like the majority of fans are not fans like what we are, like what the IB community is, like what Brian is or what I am, or where it's like, man, we're super stoked about Jackson Vaughn coming to Notre Dame. Some people are, but the majority of college fan bases aren't like that. What would be the business advantage to signing a 16-year-old to an NIL contract? You know, like, so I think naturally that would help screen some stuff out, but I'll go back through and read it.
Here's an interesting one from ND Wine and Cheese, Trevor.
Trevor BD, do you know how many SEC athletic departments that run at a deficit? It's a genuine question.
I would need to do a little bit of research on this, but I have found a couple graphics that are from 2025 that give you a little bit of data. And so, I mean, just doing a quick search, you know, I don't want to give the AI overview because they don't always tell the whole story, but there's a decent number of teams. So according to this graphic I'm looking at based on 2024, the teams that were running on a deficit were Alabama, Tennessee, Auburn, South Carolina, Missouri, and Arkansas. Those deficits were 31, 10, 15, 22, 43, and 11. And the teams that were working on a profit were Texas by 7 million, A&M by 17, LSU by 2, Oklahoma by 3, Kentucky by 5, Georgia by 44. But a lot of that had to do with their championships that they won. And then you had Arkansas at 3. So they weren't exactly like running on major profits. If you look at the Big Ten that same year, so fiscal year 2024, Ohio State was on a deficit, Penn State, Washington, Michigan State, Rutgers, 70 million, Indiana, UCLA, Illinois, Minnesota, and Maryland were all, and it was earned revenue minus the net operating cost equals the operating margin. You know, again, this may include certain things. It doesn't include other things. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it. So I'd want to look that up. and do more research. But like, there's one thing that shows that Texas was actually either 26 or 25 recently, like worked on a deficit within the last few years as well. So it depends. I mean, I've seen several articles in the past where it shows that Ohio State was working off of deficits, like huge deficits for what they were spending compared to what they're bringing in. And there were, in that graphic, there was a lot more Big Ten teams working at a deficit than SEC teams. That's exactly why the Big Ten is trying to do what they're trying to do to get more money, because there are more Big Ten schools working on a deficit than there are SEC schools. And that's why they're trying to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. So let's just wish people were more transparent about it, as opposed to it being about fairness. It's not about fairness. It's over half your league is working on a deficit from your operational budget, and this is a way that you think you can, give an extra $10, $15 million to everybody, and all of a sudden you have more teams working, as opposed to, hey, how about you spend better?
From Andrew Gilmore, why would a school like Wake Forest or Iowa State get this special treatment, but a school like San Diego State that got blocked by the power schools not get the same deal?
Well, Andrew, I don't know that you're going to agree with this, but I think if there was a belief that San Diego State would add value to a league, they would add San Diego State to the league. If the Big 12 thought that San Diego State was a program that would generate revenue, because it's a big city and a big TV market and all those other type of things, but it's not a big sports market, especially there's a reason the Chargers left. There's the reason the Padres, recently the Padres actually spent some money, but there's a reason in a lot of years the Padres aren't big spenders. There's a reason why San Diego State has remained where they are. It's not so much that they're blocked. They're blocked not because there's jealousy, in my opinion, of them being in there. They're blocked because they won't produce what they're going to make. Why would I want to bring, why would I want to bring, if we were talking like the old Pac-12, why would I want to bring San Diego State in here when they're going to generate this amount of money, but we got to pay them this higher amount of money? That doesn't make sense. And so that's the reason a team like that is going to block. If they thought that San Diego State was going to generate more revenue than it's going to cost to pay them, they'd bring them in no problem. But they don't. And that's why programs like that are there. Now, your argument is fair in that Wake Forest is probably not much different than what San Diego State is. That's a fair argument, but that's why I think you get into like, should there be a reset of who is and isn't a Power 5 team or Power 4 team? I think that's a fair conversation to have. And that's why I say, even like, I don't think it should be Power 4 and G5, because I think there's some G5 teams that are closer to Power 4 teams than they are to the MAC, or certain teams in the Sun Belt, or certain teams in Conference USA. So to Andrew's point, no, San Diego State should not be compared to USC. They'll just never be what USC is. But should they be compared to Bowling Green? No, they shouldn't. And that's where I think some of this, from a practical how it plays out standpoint, Trev, is going to be a challenge to figure out, like, how can we make this work? But so that's a big part of it. But at the same time, I'm looking at Bowling Green's. I'm looking at San Diego State's home attendance last year when they played 20,000 against Stony Brook, 31,000 against Cal, 29 against Colorado State, 24 against Wyoming, 29 against Boise State, and 22.5 against San Jose State. Say, well, if they were playing USC, they'd have more. Well, they've played Power 4 teams the last 2 years, and they still can't get to 30. They had 25,000 against Oregon State, 26.9 against Washington State. So I think, they had UCLA 3 years ago. They only had 32,000 people in the stands. I promise you, I shouldn't promise you, you'd know better than I would, that there was a lot of UCLA fans in the stands. They played Arizona State, 34,000 people in the stands for those games. You're just not seeing the numbers that some of these other schools are doing. And even the schools that aren't necessarily big draws are going to have more than 20-something thousand. But The same is true but here's the thing, to his point about Wake Forest. Here's the home attendance for Wake Forest last year. 30.7, 28.2, 29.0 against a conference team, NC State, 30.2 against Georgia Tech, 28 against SMU, 32 against North Carolina, 26.9 against Delaware. So why is Wake Forest getting a benefit that San Diego State does not? I mean, I think that's a fair argument, but the argument would more so, in my opinion, be about should Wake Forest get bumped down more so than should San Diego State be elevated. That would be a little bit of my pushback on that. But I think you bring up a good point, because Bowling Green played at Kent State last year and they had less than 10,000 people in the stands.
Yeah, I mean, the most difficult part about all of this, Andrew, is like you're bringing up why this would be so hard practically.
Yep.
Because schools like Wake Forest, Iowa State, Rutgers, other teams like that will basically get the benefit from being grandfathered into already being a part of a Power Four conference. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest issue with this. And then you even, to varying degrees within Power Four, you take two teams in the Midwest in the Big Ten. Ohio State just has more of a TV draw than Purdue football. Just does every single game. Every single home game, no matter what, I guarantee you that. I don't even have to go look up the numbers for that.
Yep.
But they would get grandfathered into the same plan. And since they're part of the Big Ten, they'd be a part of this pooling media rights rev share model. And like, that's the hard part practically about all this.
But then when you compare a team like Purdue to San Diego State, here was Purdue's home attendance in 2024 against Indiana State, 59,000.
Yeah.
Notre Dame, 61,000. That's a sellout there. Nebraska 61,000, Oregon 57. They had more people in the stands for Indiana State than Oregon, but still had 57,000. Northwestern 61,000, Penn State 58,000. That's what their team being 1-9, 1-8, and they still had 58,000 people in the stand. So even in that framework, Trev, you're still seeing way bigger attendances. Indiana in 2023, before they got good, had at least 40,000 people for every home. They had 44,000, almost 45 for a home game against Akron. You had 42,000, almost 43 for a home game against Indiana State. 43 for Rutgers, 45 for Wisconsin, whereas San Diego State can't even get to 35 with UCLA coming to town, Arizona coming to town. Wake Forest has a similar problem. And so that's the challenge here with that. And somebody said Wake Forest has a max of 31.5. Exactly. We talked about this last week. That's a big problem in the ACC. This is something that we had a conversation about. Why can't the ACC draw more revenue? And we compared the size of stadiums. That's why Clemson does what they do. And for a long time, Florida State did what they did, because look who they're competing against.
Yeah. Basketball schools.
So that does make it challenging. It makes it very challenging. So I'm with you. I think that's a challenge, and that's why I don't think you can say, well, San Diego State doesn't deserve the same money that UCLA does. Okay, but then why does Wake Forest deserve the same amount of money as Clemson? Very fair argument.
100%.
That's why I'd say, hey, listen, if you want to stay at this level, if we're negotiating, if you want to stay at this level, you better generate at least X number of TV views per home game, or you better have at least X amount of people in the stands every week to be able to justify you getting the same amount as another school. Because that was Florida State and Clemson's big issue. Why is Wake Forest, who doesn't spend money on their football program and has 30,000 people in their stands every week, making the same amount of money that we're making when we're filling out 80,000 seat stadiums and drawing tens of million more views? And the only views they even get are when we play them. So I get it. I mean, let's pull this graphic, see if I can find this graphic from the other day, Trev. But there was this graphic from TV viewership in the ACC, and it was like Miami was at like 36, and Florida State was at like 29, and you had teams that were less than 10. I mean, it was bad. It was really bad. I'm trying to find it. Here it is, right here. Give me 1 second. I got to prove that I'm not a robot, Trev. Oh, man, come on. I hate all these dang, you have to be a member articles because then I can't see it. Let me see if it's in images. But let me see TV revenue for 2026. Here we go. Miami basically averaged 3.17 million per game. And let's go to, no, I want to see ACC. Where's the ACC? Florida State was at, or Clemson was at 109. So Miami, this is for 26 to 2016 to 2013 average. Notre Dame was 4th overall. Clemson was highest in the ACC at one. Notre Dame was at 280 million. Clemson was next closest at 195. Florida State was at 176. And Miami was at 100 million. Now, Miami was a lot better last year. But then Louisville was at 81. Stanford was at 75.3. Virginia Tech was at 61. North Carolina at 61. NC State 59. Pitt 56. And then all the way down to Cal at 42. Syracuse at 47. Georgia Tech at 49. And I don't even think Wake Forest even made the cut. And this is the top 60, which would mean Wake was less than 39 million. Why does Wake Forest get the same amount of money that Notre Dame, Texas, Ohio State, Clemson, Florida State, Miami? That's something that you got to figure out, and I think that's a fair conversation to have. I don't know what the right answer to that is. And we're not sitting here trying to pretend like we do have the answers to all that. I mean, Washington State had over 30 million more viewers than what Wake Forest does. Why are they relegated to, secondary? Army, Trev, Army, and from 16 to 23, Army had total more than Utah, Maryland, Virginia Tech, North Carolina, Kentucky, NC State, BYU, Northwestern, Missouri, Baylor, Pitt, Purdue, Texas Tech, Minnesota, Iowa State, Georgia Tech, Syracuse, Kansas State, Houston, Arizona State, Cal, Cincinnati. And those are just the teams that made the top 60. So, I mean, look, dude, I get it. I get it. So what in this new format, if there's a difference between Power 4 and G5, why is Wake making more than Army? So, yeah, it's a very fair conversation to have. Very fair conversation to have. I think this is the last one, and then we'll get out of here on this.
From sine, cosine, tangent, they agree with a good amount of the bill, but the big question is, how does and would this affect Notre Dame?
I don't think it affects Notre Dame a whole lot. I think Notre Dame would like to have spending reined in as well. They will spend in the current landscape because that's what you have to do to win. But I think Notre Dame would like things reined in. The teams that are going to have advantages if all things are equal are the teams that have the great tradition and have something extra to sell. If it does get to where it's rev share and then pay and then true NIL, being in a place like Notre Dame is always going to be attractive because of the brand power that comes with being in Notre Dame. The academic degree is still going to have a big impact, and you're also making money. So I think Notre Dame keeps rolling. I don't think this affects Notre Dame at all. It won't affect Texas at all. If Texas can't just outspend everybody, there's still a lot that draws you to go play at Texas. There's still a lot that draws you to go play at Ohio State. Now, it may help Georgia recruit even better because now they can do some under-the-table deals and still not have to compete with Notre Dame and Texas and Ohio State annually on total set. I mean, it'll probably benefit some teams like that. But I think this would be fine for Notre Dame. There's nothing in here in the language that I read, Trev, and I read almost every page, even the ones that there's like 5 pages of just this is what these terms mean, which was helpful, but it's like it wasn't a 111-page bill where it was all the bill. It was also a lot of, probably 30 pages of it was just explaining what words mean. But there was nothing that I read at all that would make me think that a team like Notre Dame would have to somehow join a conference or there's something that's going to hurt Notre Dame. I think in a lot of those things in there actually help Notre Dame. If we go away from the power leagues, there's less of a need for Notre Dame to join a conference. If the pool is split amongst teams as individual entities and not because they're in a conference, then what reason would there be for Notre Dame to be in a conference if they're going to make the same amount of money as an independent? There's nothing that triggers Notre Dame joining a conference. The Notre Dame joining a conference is going to be the same things we've always said. The minute Notre Dame is no longer able to play for a championship because of rules that were set in, and then that triggers a lawsuit, that then triggers a decision to join a conference if they lose that lawsuit. That's basically all that would take. There's nothing in here, in my opinion, that impacts Notre Dame whatsoever. A team could still pay Notre Dame to say, we want you to be, we're gonna pay $90 million to whatever entity is in control of this to make sure that we get Notre Dame games, every Notre Dame home game. That doesn't mean Notre Dame's going to make $90 million if that's not what the payout is. So I don't think it hurts Notre Dame at all.
No, I've filed this under the next wave of things that happen in college football that people initially think will affect Notre Dame and force them to join a conference. We heard all of that before at the 4-team college football playoffs. Like, this could be the thing that forces Notre Dame into it. It didn't. Heard the same thing about the 12-team playoff. This could be the thing that and it didn't. So it's just one of those things, in my opinion.
Yep, agree.
Well, folks,
it's an interesting show, man.
Yeah, it was. It was good, though.
Yeah.
It was good. That will do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. No IB Nation Sports Beat the rest of this week, so Brian and I will be back tomorrow, 1 p.m. Friday, free-for-all mailbag, so make sure you bring those questions.
Re-listen to this show again, man. There's a lot to digest in all of this, so you may want to – I may listen to this show just like, did I really say that? Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and by the way, chat, I asked you guys to stay on point and engage in this conversation, and you guys did an awesome job of that today. So I really appreciate that. There's some really good contributions in the chat today and some things that kind of helped us talk about it. So I really appreciate you guys. A lot of you are saying great show. Well done, guys. Shout out to you guys as well today, because you guys did a great job of staying on point and helping us navigate through this conversation. There's some really good feedback there, because, again, we're trying to work through it as well. And so we really appreciate you guys were excellent today, and I really appreciate you doing us that solid of really staying on topic today, because I think it really helped us wade through a topic that we're still trying to come to grips with. I mean, this has only been a thing for a little over 24 hours. So really appreciate you all very much today.
On your way out of here, folks, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends, family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to stay in tune, now that it's the bulk of the offseason, there's a bunch of college football topics floating around there. Best way to stay in tune with all that and support us is boards.irishbreakdown.com inside of that Champions Lounge. Not going to want to miss that. Brian and I will see you again here tomorrow, very soon, for the Friday free-for-all mailbag here on the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Until then, have a wonderful evening. See you back here very, very soon.